We are going to not have the open forum this afternoon or later this morning because we're going to be full of content today. So welcome to the Rocky Mountain NetSuite user group. My name is Cory Anderson. I'm the president of the user group, and this is our 11th year, I believe, in operation as the user group. So welcome, and if you're new, I'm going to ask you to raise your hand in a little bit. So first of all, we'll talk about our agenda for today. We are going to, first of all, we had our breakfast and networking. That's over now. We have our welcome and general business presentation, which is what I'm doing right now. After that, we're going to hear from our Suite App meeting sponsor today, Global DSI. After a 10-minute presentation from Global DSI, we'll start our normal content, which is all about inventory. And I will be presenting the first half of this meeting today. And I'll be talking kind of high level about inventory in NetSuite and some of the basics around using physical inventory in NetSuite. And then we'll take a quick break, about 10 minutes, and then I'll do the rest of my session, take another break, and then we will have Margie Komninos from PlantScan come up, and she is going to talk about inventory as it relates to manufacturing. PlantScan is a manufacturing corporation, and so we'll kind of set the ground level basis with my part, and then Margie will kind of go deeper into the manufacturing part. So we'll go ahead and move on. Yes. Okay, so Margie is also going to be covering, landed cost and inventory control, some other things that are not only manufacturing related things. So I'd like to first of all say thank you to Coda Coffee. Coda Coffee is providing coffee for our meetings now, and it's very good coffee. So if you haven't had any, help yourself. It's right over at the breakfast table. So membership. Somebody's using Cookie Monster for their Waze app. So membership, we now have 920 members in the Rocky Mountain NetSuite user group, and that is up 40 members from July. So I feel like we have some momentum right now. We have a lot of new people joining, and we have a lot of new companies and a lot going on in the NetSuite space, especially in the Denver metro area. So membership to the user group is free. You can register for membership at RMNSUG.org. When you register, that ensures that you get notification of upcoming meetings and events. You also get the ability to attend meetings remotely. So if you're out of town or if you have any people on your team that aren't in the Denver area that can't make it to the meetings, they can attend remotely as well. We broadcast these meetings through GoToMeeting, and we also record them and post them on our website afterwards. You also have access to the LinkedIn forum if you are a member. It's a closed forum so that it doesn't get too spammy, and I'll talk about that here in just a little bit. As a member, you also get a $400 discount to SuiteWorld, and our newest offering from the user group is that we are offering CPE credits for most of our meetings, and it will be topic dependent. I foresee that most of the time we'll be able to offer those CPE credits, and those are for CPAs who need to meet those annual CPE requirements. Today we have 3 credits for this meeting because it's a 3-hour meeting. The CPE credits are sponsored by Eide Bailey. If you are here for the CPE credits, make sure that you grab a form from the front table. It's a keyword tracker, and we'll have 2 different keywords throughout the meeting that you'll need for that tracker, and then you go to the SurveyMonkey link and then register to get those credits, and they'll be within 7 days. So the membership, we also have our LinkedIn user group. We have now 416 members, and our LinkedIn group has had quite a bit of activity lately, and I'm really happy to see that. People are asking questions, and we're trying to respond and get more involvement. On the LinkedIn group, if you haven't been to the group, to that page in a while, go ahead and go check in. LinkedIn is not sending messages and notifications like they used to, so it requires you to be a little bit more involved and go in and check in on the LinkedIn group. more often. So if you post a question and somebody posts a response, you may not automatically get an email that somebody posted a response. So you'll want to check in occasionally to find out if somebody answered your question or to read other people's questions. We also post job openings on the LinkedIn forum and other notifications for the user group. So presentations, when our presentation is available on our website, discounts to SuiteWorld, things like that. As a reminder, our evaluations will be emailed to you today. And if you are a walk-in attendee and did not RSVP, please make sure that you RSVP at the front table with Margie. That way you can get on our email list, and also we can send you a meeting evaluation today. Goes out this afternoon sometime, 2 or 3 o'clock this afternoon. So please take a few minutes to fill out that evaluation. We do read those, and it helps us kind of guide how we're doing things with the user group. And remember to please register for events using the same email as your membership record so that you don't end up with 2 memberships. So as the user group, we use a production NetSuite account to run the user group. So if you have 2 different customer records or member records in NetSuite, you'll get 2 emails. We can combine those records into one, but if you use different email addresses, then you may start getting duplicate emails from us. So a note on our board of directors. Just realized this is in the way. Mariah Toms is our current / former treasurer. She is leaving the NetSuite world and moving on to bigger and better things. And so we wish her the best of luck, and I wanted to say thank you for your time. Mariah, I'm going to make you stand up in the back, please. Let's give her a round of applause, please. So we really appreciate your time and everything that you've done for the user group, and we'll definitely miss you. She was on the board for just over a year at this point. So with that said, we have a new treasurer, and that is Casey Johnson. She is standing up in the back of the room, managing our breakfast today. Casey is an associate accountant with Doozy Solutions, also known as Crafted ERP. And she just joined the board a couple of months ago. So welcome, and thank you for joining us. So that leaves our board of directors in this current state. We have me as the president. We have Margie Komninos. She's at the front table there. She is our sponsorship and membership chair. Our speaker chair, who was with us for about 3 months, left and moved out of town and got a new job, and so he is not with us anymore. So we will have a opening for our speaker chair position, and that position is responsible for finding content, finding speakers, and making sure that we have good content and valuable content for our meetings. We also have Mike Kackline from Vertifor. He's our communications chair up here in the front corner, and then Casey, who we just met from Doozy Solutions, as our treasurer. So I would like to ask, is anybody here, is this your first time meeting? I won't make you say your name and favorite color, but let's say there's probably 20 new members here, so that's fantastic. Welcome. We're very glad that you're here. We hope to see you at future meetings as well. I'd like to take a minute, if anybody has any announcements, mostly around job openings or anything related to that, I'll give you a minute to make an announcement, and then I'll try and repeat that for the people that are joining us through our go-to meeting. So does anybody, yes?
I don't have a job opening, but I am looking to change jobs, and I am purchasing manager, supply chain manager, materials manager. So if you have any openings in that field, I'd like to hear about it. Fantastic,
purchasing manager. So the best thing to do is to go to our LinkedIn forum if you haven't done that, and then post that's what you're doing. If you don't, unless you want it to not be too public, but yeah. But that's a great way to do it, and then we can maybe connect you with the right company there. And yes, sir.
We're hiring for the position of a NetSuite business consultant.
NetSuite business consultant?
Business analyst.
Okay. And what company are you with?
Komninos Corp.
Komninos Corp. Okay. Have you posted on our LinkedIn forum? I don't think you have. Okay. Yeah, so you should definitely do that. And if you're not a member, then you just request membership, and then you can post that job opening there. Okay, excellent. Yes.
I'm from Eide Incorporated, down in Colorado Springs. We are currently looking for a business analyst type person, obviously with NetSuite experience as well. We design and manufacture costume accessories and whimsical wearables. They have not yet posted anything on the LinkedIn.
Okay. So that's Elope out of Colorado Springs. They're looking for a business analyst with NetSuite experience. And if you're not familiar with Elope, they were at SuiteWorld last year, and they had a really cool, fun booth. They have some really awesome fun costume products. So you can check out their website. It's a really fun company. So thank you for sharing. And definitely post on the LinkedIn forum. Yep. Okay, anybody else? Yes.
Yeah, John McCabe with ASI Dental. We're in South part of Denver, manufacturing dental equipment. And we're looking for accounting specialists that next week we are brand new next week. We started, so we're in the implementation phase. So
Okay. Okay. You said ASI Dental? Yeah. ASI Dental looking for accounting, NetSuite related help, right? Okay, excellent. So please post on the LinkedIn forum. Anybody else? Okay, awesome. Well, thank you all for sharing, and make sure you follow up on the LinkedIn forum with that. So as I mentioned, we are offering CPE credits now. We have 3 credits for this meeting. It's sponsored by Eide. So pick up a keyword tracker form at the front desk. There's a SurveyMonkey link on that form that you just fill out, and then our team back at the office will process all of those. You must be present at the meetings to earn the credits. And then the credits will be issued within 14 days. You have 7 days to request the credits through that SurveyMonkey link. If you have any questions, you can forward those questions or direct them to info@rmnsug.org, and we can help you out with that. So if you have any tips or tricks of your own, we are always interested in learning more tips and tricks that we can potentially present at the meetings. You can submit a tip or trick through rmnsug.org through the Contact Us form. And if you're interested in actually presenting that tip and trick at a meeting, please say so, because we are always looking for more involvement from our members to come up and talk about their tips and tricks that they found, and maybe specific to their businesses and industries. So please, if you have anything, fill out the form at the website. So I'll talk about our meeting sponsorship briefly. So the membership to our user group is free. The cost of our meetings is supported by 2 levels of sponsorship. We have a Suite App sponsor and a breakfast sponsor. Our Suite App sponsors are companies that offer a plugin or a bundle that work directly with NetSuite. They have to be available through suiteapp.com, which means that they're verified by NetSuite. And those sponsors get to come up and do a 10-minute presentation. And then we also have our breakfast sponsors. Our breakfast sponsor must have NetSuite consulting staff on hand and offer NetSuite consulting services. And so we'll talk about our sponsors in just a minute here. But those are the 2 different levels of sponsorship. Right now, our Suite App sponsorship, it's a very popular sponsorship. We now are booking July 2021 for our sponsorship. Everything is booked until then. We do have a waiting list if anybody backs out, and we can try and get more, other people in there sooner. And then our breakfast sponsor opportunities, we have starting in November 2020. Our upcoming meetings, in November this year, we have a module overview and our 2019.2 updates. Our module overview is going to be kind of an insider's view of the different modules in NetSuite. We're going to have one of our solution consultants from Eide present this and talk about the different modules and what they do and the different options that are available to you in NetSuite. So it should be a really neat insider's view of all of the different things that NetSuite offers. In January 2020, we're going to go through the new Suite Analytics workbook features. It's pretty much ready for prime time. I know that there's been some other presentations out there about it, but they are iterating on it and making it better with each new release cycle. And it's getting more and more flexible and functional. So we'll have that meeting coming up in January. In March, we'll have our 2020.1 update, and then we are not sure of the topic yet. If you have any ideas for topics on the forms, on the evaluation form, please say the topics that you're interested in, because we take that into account for these meetings that we don't have a topic for yet. In May of 2020, we're going to go back to our workflow and go through how to do workflows or suite flows in NetSuite. And then we'll have a Suite World update, because that'll be just after Suite World at that point. And then July next year, we'll go back to our basics. It'll be kind of a NetSuite 101 meeting, designed more for people that are brand new to NetSuite, kind of a potpourri of different topics there. So those are our upcoming meetings. They may change, but mostly they will stay at that rate right now. So I'd like to say thank you to our sponsors this morning. Our Suite App sponsor is DSI Global, who we'll hear from in just a moment. And then our breakfast sponsor today is Nolan Business Solutions. Nolan Business Solutions offers consulting services. They also have some Suite App stuff, so you may have seen some of their Suite App bundles. But today they're here as a consulting firm, and they can help you with those needs as well. So thank you both for being here today. And so at this point, I'd like to turn it over to Laura Sales from DSI Global. Come on up. I need to find you in my list here.
Yeah, there were quite a few.
Did you go away?
I hope not.
Oh, gotcha. Okay. You want to sit down?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks. Hi, everybody. All right. Hi, everybody. I'm Laura Sales. It's actually my last name. I didn't make it up, didn't pick it myself. Just, I didn't have a choice, I don't think. So I'm here today. Thank you all for coming. I'm going to talk a little bit about DSI and what we do, who we are, and I'm on a very tight timeline. So I will try to cover as much as I can. My booth is in the back. We are raffling a $100 gift card off. So if you guys want to drop a card, I'll be happy to mail it to you when I get back to Kansas City. So DSI as a company, we are based out of Kansas City, Missouri. We have offices all over the world. We have about 300 employees worldwide. I think there's about 200 of us. Most of us are out of Kansas City. I cover the Midwest. We were the Suite App Partner of the Year in 2019 and 2017, which is a big recognition from NetSuite. DSI as a company uses NetSuite. We've invested heavily into the market and to the product, and really want to help businesses, manufacturers, distributors, really with their inventory, and I'll get more into that. We are privately held, family owned for 40 years. Actually started as a J.D. Edwards shop, helping with the data collection there, and as businesses move to the cloud, we have made that shift. So, you know, what DSI is all about is really helping businesses optimize inventory management. You know, it's really important more today than ever to have the right stock, the right levels, the right place, and getting it to your customers at the right time, all to help with that cost issue, right? The customer demand today is greater than it ever was. And if we can help companies, you know, reduce carrying costs, speed up delivery, and things of that sort, it's great. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our cloud inventory product. On this slide, I'm highlighting some of the features and differentiators of cloud inventory. Cloud inventory was created to provide a layer of visibility across your entire supply chain. You know, we understand that inventory is no longer confined to the four walls of the warehouse, and there's what we call inventory in the wild. And so that online, offline ability, you know, maybe you are somebody in oil and gas or medical devices, and you need to track and trace serialized product to ORs. being able to have an app on a mobile device that your sales rep or somebody can easily use to update NetSuite is kind of the bread and butter of what Cloud Inventory sets out to do. Obviously NetSuite would be the financial system of record, and we're going to be feeding what that needs back to it. The flexible integration bullet, there's oftentimes organizations that are running a variety of systems and they need that layer of visibility with their inventory to talk to multiple systems. So Cloud Inventory can do that. And something that I find a big differentiator is this sub-second response time. Being able to have users using the tool quickly and efficiently is key. So this slide kind of highlights, oh, there we go, a bit of a delay. Some of in the top parts, the features of Cloud Inventory and what we're getting from information from NetSuite and feeding back to NetSuite. And I'm happy to talk about this more. I know that we only have a few minutes here, so whether it's that wave automation or picking orders, FIFO, FIFO, LIFO, those kinds of things, multiple pick methods, LPN management, all of that is done within Cloud Inventory. Touching on this slide real quick, I'm sorry about the automation here, but we really want to help businesses in 4 key areas, whether that's productivity, compliance, inventory optimization, or revenue generation. And these boxes here is kind of how we recognize some of that ROI. And this slide, you can see we kind of tier it out: productivity, compliance, inventory optimization, and revenue generation, right? Really getting into barcode scanning. Maybe that's the first tier that you guys accomplish with achieving a new level of productivity. Compliance, maybe there's somebody in here that has to track serialized product. Inventory optimization, helping, I mentioned that earlier, reducing carrying costs, and then all the way to tracking inventory in the field. This slide is really just to highlight that, from the supplier to delivery, DSI touches every part of the supply chain. This is just a slide of highlighting a handful of the customers that we're working with today. It's a bit of a delay, sorry. The last mile piece, whether maybe somebody has service work orders or inventory in the field that they need to track and move. Maybe it's somebody that has to, inspect and maintain equipment in the field or in rural job sites. Maybe you're delivering product, or you are a company that is, you have trucks that are selling goods off of it, and then providing that proof of delivery. Our apps with Cloud Inventory handle all of that. This is just a snippet of what our field service that's built for NetSuite looks like. It's shown here on a tablet. Our route sales delivery application. And that is really all that I had for today. I think I'm under time. Thank you.
It's me again. All right. All right, can you hear me? Microphone good? All right, awesome. So give me just a second here to get my stuff up. Okay, here we go. So again, my name is Cory Anderson. I'm with Eide. and we do implementation, consulting, and support for NetSuite. And before I forget, Nolan has a giveaway as well. So please put your business card in the bucket in the back. So if you have 2 cards, you can do one for both, but make sure you guys put your cards in. We'll do a drawing at the end of the meeting for those gift cards. I almost forgot, sorry. Okay. So today we're going to talk all about inventory. So the very first thing that we're going to start with is the CPE keyword number 1. So this is to write down on your CPE trackers. Your keyword tracker, the first word is NetSuite. The second keyword will be given by Margie towards the end of her presentation. So these are the things that I'm going to cover today. First of all, I'll talk about the different types of inventory records. We'll talk about the elements of an item record in NetSuite. Talk about locations or warehouse locations, transferring inventory, importing and exporting as it relates to item records, inventory management, and then depending on how much time I have some bonus material, which is a purchase order to payment process, and also drop shipping and special order inventory. If I can't get to those, this slide deck will still be posted on our website, so you can go back in and look at those sections later on. And then if you have any follow-up questions on that, we can always talk about it through our LinkedIn forum as well. If I have time, I'll cover those items as well. So a little bit of a disclaimer, the features discussed today may or may not be available to in your NetSuite account currently. I'm not going to talk about what modules you need for these features, but rather my goal is to give you a better understanding of some key inventory related features that NetSuite has to offer. So further research will most likely be required on your part to fully understand these features and the many ramifications of using them. The LinkedIn forum is available to all members to ask detailed follow-up questions that we may not be able to address here today. Also, if you're not familiar with Suite Answers, it might just become your best friend. Suite Answers has tons of great information, including video training on different topics. So to get to Suite Answers, you go to the support menu in your NetSuite instance, and then Suite Answers, and it'll take you to the Suite Answers portal, which will give you the ability to search for different topics, view NetSuite created documentation, video content, all kinds of great information in Suite Answers. So with that being said, today we're going to talk about some advanced inventory features, and the advanced inventory module, when you turn that on, it gives you some of these features. So if you need any of these capabilities, or if you're already using them, then you already have advanced inventory enabled. But these features are require the advanced inventory: barcoding and item labels, lot tracking, matrix items, pick, pack, and ship functionality, serialized inventory, multiple units of measure, and the demand-based inventory replenishment data, which is preferred stock levels, reorder points, safety stock, things like that. So those are all part of the advanced inventory module. Okay, so we'll jump right in. First of all, the different types of inventory. So as far as inventory goes in NetSuite, there's physical inventory and then a non-physical inventory. So physical inventory, here's the 4 main physical inventory types. We have items or inventory items. A subtype of that is matrix items, and I'll describe what those are in a minute. We have kits and packages. They call them kits/packages. We have item groups, and then also assembly items. So those are the 4 key physical item types. And then we also have some non-physical inventory item types. So I'm not going to talk about these today, but I'll just kind of describe them briefly right now. We have non-inventory for sale. An example of this would be something that you custom create for each order. Maybe it's like engraving on a product or something like that. There's non-inventory for purchase, which might be office supplies that you purchase but you don't resell, but you want to track that in your accounting system in NetSuite. There's also non-inventory for resale. So this might be dropship items that you do not store, but you sell directly from the vendor. And just another side comment on that, on dropshipping, you can use this non-inventory for resale type, or you can also use a standard inventory item type for dropshipping. The difference might be is if sometimes you physically stock the item and sometimes you dropship it, then you wouldn't want it to be a non-inventory for resale product. You would want it to be just a standard inventory item. Some other item types in NetSuite, we have service items, download items, gift certificates, and other charge items. So in that case, think like gift wrapping. But you could potentially put that under a non-inventory for sale as well. So there's no right or wrong way to use these items. Well, in some cases there are, but they're like a lot of these items can be used for multiple purposes. There's not only one specific intended purpose for each of these item types. So again, Suite Answers can give you a lot more information about the non-physical inventory item types. That's just basically all I'm going to mention on those today. So let's talk about items. First of all, a regular item. Think of it as an individual item that is sold and tracked all by itself. So in my my previous company, we did outdoor sporting goods and fly fishing and things like that. So that's where some of my material is coming from, is that previous history. So think of a tent as one item. That's just, it is what it is. It's pre-built by somebody else. You buy it from a manufacturer. You sell that item just as it is. So that's just a regular straight up inventory item all by itself. Then we have matrix items. So matrix items are items of the same type that have a variation. So you can have a variation in color, you can have a variation in size, you can have a variation in both. So these are referred to as matrix items in NetSuite. So a matrix item will have a parent record. That parent item doesn't represent a physical piece of inventory, but it represents that matrix group of items. So then you have the sub-items, which are the actual products themselves. So those may vary by size, color, and that's just, standard variations. But you can vary by any type of attribute you want, and you can create different lists that can be used as matrix item variations. So any variation type you have, you can use for matrix items in NetSuite. The advantage of using a matrix items is NetSuite groups those together for reporting purposes. It gives you a hierarchical view for reporting, and it makes sure that you understand that items are grouped together. But at the end of the day, when you sell a matrix item, you're selling one item. You're only selling a red shirt in large. You're not selling, all of those pieces together. So they're still individual pieces, but they're connected through this matrix. So I just wanted to point out that a best practice is to use the matrix item assistant to create matrix items in NetSuite. You can create matrix items and associate them together via a CSV import, but to organize that import is a lot more complicated than it needs to be. Just use the matrix item assistant, and it walks you through the process, and it creates all of the different variation items automatically for you. And it also lets you set up the naming convention for those. So that is a best practice, is to use the matrix item assistant to create those. Okay, now we'll talk about item groups. So an item group is a unit composed of items from your inventory. So a group is sold as one unit, but it might have several member components. So think of an ultimate camping kit. So you might have a tent, a sleeping bag, a mattress, and a stove. And priced individually, they're all different prices, but the item group is a sum of the prices of the individual items. So you basically stock and inventory each item separately, but you create a group that when you put a group into a sales order, then all of those items are part of that sales order as well. Does that make sense? Doing good? Okay. So that's an item group. Similar to an item group, we have a kit or package. So a kit package is a unit composed of items from your inventory, just like an item group. It's also sold as one unit, and it has several member components. So you can think of the ultimate camping kit in two ways. You can think of it as a kit package or an item group. The difference is that a kit packet, or I'm sorry, an item group, the price is composed of the individual item prices from the components. A kit package, you can set that price individually. So on a kit, you might want to give a little bit of a discounted rate from buying all of the components separately. So in this case, the item group was $650 total, where the kit package, you can make it any price you want. So $599.95, you know, a nice retail friendly price. So then we have assembly items. An assembly item is an inventory item made up of several components, but identified as a single item. The difference is that assembly items are manufactured by combining raw materials you stock. So for a tent, you would have fabric, you'd stock thread, you'd have zippers, mesh, strap material, pulls. So an assembly is something that you have all of the components as raw materials, but then you build that item. So assemblies are primarily used for manufacturing. There are other instances of assemblies. So let's say you have a product and you ship that product in from a factory overseas, and it goes to a manufacturing facility, but maybe that product has to be stuffed with material before it ships to the customer. So you can have an assembly that has the main product itself, and then a service charge from the manufacturing facility, and that service charge is part of the assembly. So you're still kind of manufacturing and putting it together, but the different components aren't all just raw materials. It can be the raw materials plus other charges involved in that manufacturing process. Okay, so that's an assembly item, mostly used for manufacturing. So here are some of the key differences. I'm gonna make this smaller. So an assembly, the members of an assembly can be inventory items, they can be non-inventory items. You can have assembly that contains assemblies, that would be a sub-assembly. You can also have service items and other charges. Remember, we talked about all of the, you know, those different item types early on there. A kit package can include inventory items, non-inventory items, can also have assemblies. You can have a kit within a kit, and then also service items. And then an item group can contain inventory items, assemblies, kits, or service items. Now remember, the inventory item, that's just the one static product by itself. And that can be a matrix-based inventory item or a non-matrix-based inventory item. Those can all be put into any of these different types of groups. Yes, sir?
On kits, can you mix inventory and non-inventory? Because we've had major challenges with that.
In theory, yes. You can mix inventory and non-inventory. I hesitate to say yes for sure, because you know, there's so many variables. It depends on how you're doing it. I'd like to understand maybe later, like, more about what your challenges are there. But yeah, in theory, you can have both. This information is from NetSuite Help Center, so they're saying yes, right? So the pricing is one of the differences with these different products. An assembly, the item price is independent of its member prices. A kit or in package, the item price is independent of its item members, but the item group, the price is dependent upon its member prices. So that's the key difference between a kit or package and an item group. If you need to be able to set the pricing independently for a group of products, a kit or package is definitely the way to do it. So as far as GL accounts, an assembly is able to identify a COGS account, an income account, an asset account, separate from all of its component items. A kit or package is able to identify a separate income account, and then an item group has no account designation available. So there are some basically more flexible options with assemblies and kits and packages. The inventory impact of these different items in assembly, If you build an assembly, it decreases the asset account of the member items and increases the asset account of the assembly. So you're taking the money from one bucket and putting it into this other bucket when you build that assembly, because you're taking the raw material that's not available anymore and you're making something new available. In a kit or package, basically when you fulfill a kit or package or when you ship it against a sales order, it decreases the asset account of the member items. So there's no GL impact of a kit or package until you fulfill it, until it actually gets sold. In an item group, fulfilling a group decreases the asset account of the member items. So it's the same inventory impact as a kit or package. So those are some of the key differences between these different, basically, ways that you can group items together. Any questions on that before we go? Yes. Can an assembly item be part of a matrix? That's a good question. I feel like yes. I'm pretty sure you can do that, yeah. And I'm getting a nod from Mark in the back, so yes. I'm gonna say yes on that. Okay, an assembly can be part of a matrix. It would actually surprise me if it couldn't be, so yeah. Any other questions? Okay, great. We will move on. All right, so now we'll talk about some of the key elements of an item record, some of basically the key fields in NetSuite that we want to be talking about or thinking about. So first of all is the internal ID. The internal ID is a unique identifier that is for use in internal and NetSuite only. You cannot have duplicate internal IDs. Every single record type in NetSuite has a unique internal ID. On item records, we also have an external ID. External IDs are optional. If you have external systems that use a unique ID for each SKU is when you might want to use an external ID. One example would be, let's say you have a website, and so in NetSuite you have an internal ID, but then you have an item ID or an item number. That item number might be different, probably is going to be different from your internal ID. So that item number is more of a universal connector between NetSuite and other systems. So if you have like a website where you have inventory there, sometimes the best practice is to use that external ID in NetSuite the same as it is on your website. And so one example of an external ID might be this 8-digit code. So in this example, the first 3 letters would represent the manufacturer. So each manufacturer you purchase from or vendor you purchase from might have their own manufacturer code. And then the last 5 digits here, in this case, would represent the last 5 digits of the UPC minus the last check digit. And so if you use this type of structure, then an external ID is going to be unique for every single product as well. You cannot have duplicate external IDs. NetSuite will not allow it. Just like you cannot have duplicate UPC codes. NetSuite won't allow that. So if you use this type of ID for your inventory number, then you need to assign that to your external ID. The downside of external IDs is that they cannot be displayed on an item record, not easily anyway. You could create a workflow that sources the external ID that then triggers that field to populate when you load the record, but it can't natively be shown or added to a form on an item record. But if you create a saved search, the external ID is always able to be pulled out in a saved search. So external IDs are also really important for CSV importing, which I'll talk about a little bit later on as well. The next key component of an item record is the item name number. This can be up to 60 characters. This will appear in lists on transactions. So it's kind of the, what I usually recommend is making your external ID basically a duplicate of the item name number, because you can't upload very well to or import to an item name number as your key field, but you can with an external ID, which we'll talk about. The display name code, this is optional. If it's populated, it will appear in the item column on transactions by default. Of course, you can customize the columns that show up on transactions and customize those forms, but by default, this is what will show. And then also with some inventory management or warehouse management systems, the display name code is what will show up maybe on a mobile scanner by default. And so a lot of time, the display name code is really important for logistics operations in your company. But there's a limitation of 60 characters. So it can't be, you know, like the entire title, like it might be on your website. You have to usually cut that back. And then you also have a UPC code. UPC is the standard UPC codes are 12 digits. You can also use EAN codes in NetSuite, which are a 13-digit code. But in either case, it has to be unique. You cannot have duplicate UPCs and EANs. The advantage of having UPCs in NetSuite is that you can print labels from products and have a barcode that will scan as your UPC code print out from NetSuite. So if you think of maybe a retail situation, you want to print out barcodes or price labels to put on your products in your store. Or if you have inventory coming into your warehouse that doesn't have barcodes from the manufacturer, and you need to make sure that your warehouse management system can scan those products correctly, you might need to print out a UPC code to be able to scan correctly in that case. So another key part, and then we'll go into a quick demonstration. Another key element of an item record is the vendor, and the vendor is who you purchase the product from. So a vendor, you can have a vendor code, and this is optional, it's not required, but a vendor code a lot of the time is the internal SKU from the vendor SKU basically, and you might need to track that in NetSuite as well. If you create a purchase order and send it to that vendor and they require you to put their code, their SKU on your purchase order form, then you'd use the vendor code for that purpose. And vendor codes are not like internal or external IDs. I'm pretty sure you can create a duplicate vendor code. You probably wouldn't want to because that might cause other issues. But I don't think NetSuite manages that. Also, part of a vendor is the purchase price. So this will be the price that you purchase from that vendor, the price of the product, your cost from the vendor. Typically, purchase prices, they'll only show 2 decimal points on the item record, but NetSuite actually saves more digits. So they save, I don't know if there's a limit, but Margie has tested it at up to 5 digits and pulled it in later in other ways to see that. I don't want to go into a lot of detail, but if you have questions about showing multiple, more than 2 digits on purchase prices, like maybe you have items that cost, you know, 0.01295 pennies, like, you know, you sell 10,000 of those, that adds up, and those extra decimal points make a difference. So there are ways around that, and Margie is the expert in that. So if you have questions about that, we can follow up on the LinkedIn forum. We also have quantity pricing schedules. So pricing schedules allow you to assign a specific discount based on the quantity purchased. Pricing schedules can also be used to define quantity discounts that you get when purchasing from certain vendors. So you can have multiple vendors on one item. So if you have an item that you can purchase from different people or different companies, they might have different prices, they might have different purchasing structures. So you can track all of that on the item record in NetSuite. Then we also have related to a vendor, whether that vendor is preferred or not. So this is, if the vendor is marked as preferred on your item record, then when you go to order items, the order items page in NetSuite, that item will come up to be purchased from the preferred vendor only. You can create purchase orders other ways, but in the order item screen, the preferred vendor checkbox is what drives it to show up there correctly. Okay, so now we're going to switch to a demo, and I just want to mention this is a demo account. It's a One World demo account, and there's a ton of bundles installed in this demo account. And so there's going to be features in here and fields that are not standard And if you have specific questions about where those fields come from, we can always follow up later on and answer those questions. Yes?
What is the Wi-Fi code here? Are we using?
Guest DFC should be,
Okay.
yeah, and it should just be open. Yep. Okay, so I'm going to go to an item record, and I think we'll just start with this standard inventory item here. I will zoom in. Okay. Whew. Okay. All right. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit here. Is that better? Okay. So some of the key components up here in the upper left-hand corner, we have the item name and number. So in this scenario, it's a readable format, and so it's animate T-shirt CL. We can see that there is no display name code assigned to this product, and that's not required, but you can put it there if you need to. If there was a UPC code, it would be listed right here. And one thing I just want to note really quick about UPC codes is that if you are working with UPC codes in Excel and then populating your inventory records, you need to, make sure that when you're saving your Excel files that your UPC columns don't show in the exponential format, because you can upload it in that format here, and then you'll go in and it'll say 89242 exponential, 00.000. So you just want to make sure that your UPC codes are formatted correctly, because you can upload them wrong in NetSuite. The vendor name and code, this field isn't typically standard up here. We would typically have that in the, I believe it's in the pricing sub-tab. We'll look at that in a minute. Classification information, you can assign different classification information to inventory items. And so let's scroll down. Now this is, what else do we want to see? We want to see our inventory tabs. So there's an inventory management section here. We'll come back and talk about that a little bit later on. We also have some locations. We'll talk about that. But here's our vendors sub-tab, and in this particular account, there's no vendor set up for this item. But you can see that if there was a vendor, it would show you the name of the vendor. It would show you the vendor code if you had assigned one. If there was any subsidiary assigned to that, or that product was assigned to a subsidiary, if you had a pricing schedule, here's where you would mark whether this vendor is preferred for this product or not, and then what the price is, your purchase price for that product from that vendor. So if you have multiple vendors set up, they'll all show down here. And then we also have, let's see, I think that's the core of what I wanted to show you right now. So I'm going to go back to my slideshow, and then I think we have, yeah, we'll talk about pricing, and then we'll look at that pricing section. So for pricing, you can set up price levels for each item. Price levels can be assigned a different discount or markup amounts. You can assign a price group to individual customers. So this pricing is your customer, the price that you're selling it for, not the price that you're purchasing it for. The price you're purchasing it for is the vendor price, the vendor purchase price. In this case, this is what you're selling it for. So you can create a pricing group and then assign that pricing group to individual customers. To set up a pricing group, you would first set up the price level with the markup or discount, which I'm going to show you how to do real quick. Then you would set up the price group with the same name as the price level. You would assign the price group to that item record, and then you can assign that price group to specific customers. So there's kind of a few steps in setting up that price group, but if you follow this step by step here, then you can set up the price groups that way. The other option is you can just assign individual customers a specific price level, okay? But a price group is an extra functionality that NetSuite is built in. So I'm going to go back to this item record, and here's our pricing sub-tab. And at the very bottom here, we have our standard pricing. Now, because this is a one world account, we have these other subsidiaries. We have Australia, Canada, Europe, and Great Britain. So these are all different pricing structures if you sell internationally, or if you have different subsidiaries that sell products at different prices, then you can set those subsidiaries up to have different pricing structures. So currently we have these price levels set up in this account. We have a list price, which isn't populated. I'm going to go in and populate that here in a minute. But then we have a 15% discount level, 5%. We have an employee purchase price, a VIP customer, which is better than the employee price. So I would probably not be happy with that if I was an employee here. I would figure out how to be a VIP customer, right? The wholesale price, which is what you might sell it for at a wholesale discount, and then maybe you have a retail store and you have a different retail price, different from the list price. So I'm going to go ahead and edit this real quick. And so in these price levels, and this is a custom list. A price level is a list, and you can create different price levels. And if I have time, I'll go ahead and show you that real quick. So I'm going to go back down here. Oh, and did I mention this is a sub item? So this is a matrix sub item, and you can see that it's a sub item of apparel and then anime t-shirt. And the way that this account is structured, they actually have apparel as a matrix parent item, and then an anime t-shirt as a sub parent, and then the actual sizes and colors as the sub items. So you can have multiple hierarchies working there. So here's my pricing section. So my list price, let's say my list price is $100, and I'm going to go ahead and tab out of that. And you can see that my discount levels will automatically populate based on that list price. So if you change your list price, then all of the other price levels are going to automatically update as well. The other thing that we can do is we can have these quantity discounts. So if let's say we have a quantity discounts of, we'll go in quantity of 5 increments. And so we'll give a $5 discount for each of those price breaks or those quantity breaks. So we'll do a 95, a 90, an 85, and an 80. And so you can see that NetSuite's obviously populating all of the prices based on how you have those price levels set up. So this is how you can have a lot of variable options. You can assign price levels to customers again, or you can create a group and assign the pricing group to those customers as well. Any questions on the pricing? There's more to the pricing, but I'm just going to trying to keep it high level right now. But there's a lot of things that you can do with it. What I'll do real quick is I'll go in and I'll show you where a price level is set up. So I'm logged in as an admin. I'm going to go to customization, lists, records, and fields, and then lists. Yes, I will leave. I didn't save that. And when no, that's not where I wanted to go. I'm sorry. I wanted to go to accounting, setup, customization. Where is that? Accounting. Setup. There it is. Accounting and accounting lists. Sorry. All right, here we go. So here's where we set up our pricing groups and our price levels. And so these are accounting lists, which are different than your standard lists. Your custom lists you can use for like custom field values in NetSuite. The lists on the accounting lists are going to show up and apply to different record types. So a price level I would set up here. I'm going to click that, and then it should show our different price levels. So you can see those are all the price levels that were showing on that item record. And then the pricing group, that's where we would set up a pricing group as well. Thanks for the assist over there. All right. So I'm going to go back and any questions before we move on? Okay. So let's move into talking about inventory locations. So we'll talk about, first of all, some elements of a location. These are different fields that are available to be used with locations. So a location, you can have multiple locations assigned to all of your different inventory items. You can store the inventory, different levels of inventory, obviously, in those different locations, and then you can use those locations for different purposes. I've seen locations used in other ways rather than just being a physical location. They've also been, you can also use them for virtual locations as well. So maybe it's inventory that you don't stock, but inventory that's available to you, maybe for drop shipping or special orders or stuff like that. So locations can be used multiple ways. And then a quick note on locations. I just recently found out that you can have up to 100 locations in a standard NetSuite account by default. And we have a client that is wanting more, and that's why this came up. And so apparently you can request more locations available in your account. The downside of that is that it would start to dramatically slow down your NetSuite instance, and especially when the sublist records are loading, it can take a very, very long time when you have all of these locations loading whenever you bring up one inventory record. So caution, if you're going to consider adding multiple locations or a lot of locations like that, it's going to start slowing stuff down. So elements of a location, we have quantity on hand, we have a value, which is a calculated field, we have an average cost, which is calculated, a last purchase price, which is based on the records that are related to that inventory item. We have a reorder point and a preferred stock level. These are part of the advanced inventory module, and these are the demand forecasting fields, and we'll talk about these a little bit more later too. So reorder point, preferred stock level, lead time, and safety stock level, those are all part of the advanced inventory management. There's also a quantity on order, quantity committed, and quantity available fields by default on all of these different locations. So I'm going to go back in and look at the location record here and see if we can find one that has something with a inventory on hand.
Cory, can you manage locations according to item, or do all locations apply to all items?
When you create a location, it's available to all items. You can't just say this set of items is only for this location and vice versa. Yeah. As far as I know, there may be some crazy customization you can do, but like Mike Cackline says, it's better to use native functionality, because when you customize, there's a lot more opportunity to break, especially when new releases come out. Let's see, do we have, yeah, here we go. So in this account, these are all different locations. And so this is a one world account with different international locations. So we have London, Melbourne, Sydney, the US West, DC has some inventory in it. And so there's 74 on hand. So the quantity on hand means that's how many that are physically there in theory. If your inventory accounts are accurate. If you have multiple units of measure enabled, there's also base unit of quantity on hand. So if you had, let's say your quantity, a quantity of one represented actually 10 units in a box, then you can have a multiple units. So in that case, this would say 740 base units, you know, going the other way. So that's an option as well. The value is based on the last purchase price times the quantity on hand. So that's how many, or that's how much that inventory is worth in your warehouse right now or in that location. In this case, there are no reorder points and preferred stock levels being calculated on these products, but it's turned on in the system. So these fields are here. We have a safety stock level, and I'll go through those fields in a little bit more detail later on. Some of these are custom fields that are based on some bundles that are installed in this account. Default return cost, we have standard cost, inventory cost templates, but here are those three other main fields. So quantity on order. So if you have a purchase order that you've submitted or created for these products, then whatever the quantity on that purchase order is will be outstanding here, and it'll say you have that many on order. If you have sales orders that are outstanding, that are not fulfilled in your system, and the inventory is committed to those sales orders, then the quantity committed column is going to represent the amount that's on those sales orders, okay? Therefore, we have the quantity available, which is going to take your total quantity on hand minus your quantity committed, and that's how many you have available to sell today. Yes?
How do we get these different fields in our inventory area? Like I have the different lock codes, but it just says on hand and available. I don't have.
If you don't have quantity on order, committed, and available, it could be that your form was customized and those fields were removed.
Yeah.
I believe those are standard fields though. So I would first of all look at customizing that form and then look at the sublists under there to see if they've been turned off for one reason. Yeah, I believe those are there by default. So probably some customization that happened to remove them. Yep. Okay, so any questions on these location quantities, that type of thing right now? All right, so we'll move on. And again, I'll come back to some of those fields later in the inventory management section. So how do we add inventory into NetSuite? So there are basically 3 key methods to do this. First of all is an item receipt. So an item receipt must be received from a purchase order or a transfer order. So the item receipt is going to add the received inventory to the location specified on the item receipt. You can't do an item receipt unless it's being received from a PO or a transfer order. And I'm going to talk about the transfer order a little bit later for sure. But it's the same process basically as a purchase order. So that's method number 1. Method number 2 is an inventory adjustment. So an inventory adjustment is kind of like a free-form way to add inventory to your system. It's not reliant on a purchase order or a transfer order. Inventory adjustments aren't designed to be used for the standard way of receiving inventory into your locations. They really should only be used for adjustments that are corrective, such as missing inventory or inventory that was missing that you found. Or maybe when you do cycle counts will help you create inventory adjustments that correct your inventory on hand based on what's physically on the shelf. An inventory adjustment does not balance out the general ledger. So you can adjust inventory in without showing that it's been paid for. Does that make sense? So if you so in theory, if you have inventory, let's say you have 10 showing in NetSuite, but then you do a cycle count and it shows, and you only have 5 on the shelf. Well, what happened to those other 5? Who knows, right? So you're going to do an inventory adjustment to remove that 5 from your account. So that's actually going to show as ultimately a loss because that's inventory you paid for that you don't have anymore, that you can't sell, right? Going the other direction, if you find that so you've taken it out of inventory, it's going to hit your GL with a loss. But then if you add that inventory back in later, then you're also adding it back in without a previous transaction. So let's say you never showed that inventory on hand at all, and all of a sudden you show 10 on the shelf, and you're like, well, where did this 10 come from? I don't know, but we need to be able to sell it. So we're going to do an inventory adjustment into NetSuite, but that's not tied to a purchase order. So what you're doing is you're adding the inventory into your assets, but you're not showing that you actually paid for it. Does that make sense? So that's what an inventory adjustment is doing, is it's really making those adjustments without balancing out the GL, which may be okay. It just, you got to be aware of that's what it's doing. Inventory adjustments do preserve LIFO and FIFO. LIFO is last in, first out. FIFO is first in, first out. So those are accounting costing preferences. So the third way, yes?
Can you talk through that a little bit more on the not balancing of the GL? So if I have inventory that we found,
yeah,
we're we're going to say, okay, now I have 10 items in the system, debit inventory, credit.
So if you found the inventory, and you're going to ingest it into the system, well, you can try and dig into the past of what happened with that item. So maybe you had a PO, and that PO had 10 of that item showing it was on order, but the item receipt, they didn't get received on the item receipt, but then they got put on the shelf, right? So then that purchase order, that item receipt isn't created so that you're not actually showing, I mean, maybe you did end up paying for it. That depends on how your bills are created from those POs. But maybe you said there's a shortage, we didn't get these products, we're not paying for them, right? But then they actually got put on the shelf. But then later on, you find them, and you're like, oh, we actually did receive them. So you can go all the way back to the beginning from that PO and receive it against the PO, or you can do this inventory adjustment. When you do the inventory adjustment, it's just hitting the asset account without showing that you actually paid for it, because you didn't pay for it. Does that make sense?
You don't have to balance the GL or not?
What's that?
Don't you have to balance the GL?
No, your assets increase, but so does your, you have to pick a cost account. Yeah, it'll balance on the balance sheet, but you're just not showing, by not balancing the GL, I'm saying you're not showing that you paid for this asset that you received. Does that make sense? If the purchase order is already closed, you can open the purchase order if it's not in a closed period. If it's in a closed period, then you can create a new PO, receive it, go through, and then put it through that standard process. If the PO is closed, you can edit the PO and go to the line and uncheck the close box on that line, and then it'll show partially billed pending receipt. So then you can receive them on that at the same time. Yeah. Yes, Margie. That's an option too.
Just know that average costing, it's going to change the average cost for the product. Now you can bring it in and originally, like, you know that value is, because then you use it to resell. You know, basically, it's going to show as part of the sale the cost of goods sold. But there is an inventory variance account that NetSuite takes care of it. I'm not an accounting person.
Yeah.
So that's kind of magic.
I'm sorry, I can't repeat all of that for the online people right now. But basically, I think that this can be a very sticky topic. And if you have questions specific, first of all, I would maybe experiment and do an inventory adjustment and look at the GL impact on those adjustments, and then kind of you can see how it's affecting your system. You can also, like Margie said, do the adjustment at a zero cost so that it's not adding any value into that. So there are a lot of ways that this can affect your account. So we'll talk about the third way. The third option is it's called an adjust inventory worksheet. And I have this red flag up here because this is a method that can be really damaging to your accounting system. So the adjust inventory worksheet form is used to enter changes to the quantity or value of inventory items other than lot numbered, serial numbered, or inactive items. An adjust inventory worksheet adjusts quantities exclusive of previous stock totals. Okay, that's the key point there. The costing history is averaged. So it's basically erasing your costing history. LIFO and FIFO is not preserved in this scenario. It updates the average cost, thereby resetting the historical average cost information. So here's the differences between the two options: inventory adjustment and adjust inventory worksheet. The adjust inventory form is inventory adjustment form. It's inclusive of the previous stock levels. So the adjust inventory form adds 10 in this scenario to whatever you had before. If you have 10 and you add 10, your new on hand is going to be 20. Okay. The adjust inventory worksheet is exclusive. It overwrites what was already in the system. So if it shows 5 and you do an adjust inventory worksheet of 10, your new total on hand is 10. And it basically erases that previous quantity as if it was it never happened. So that's why I have a big red flag on the adjust inventory worksheet, because there are reasons to use it, but it's usually very specific. If you need to fix your last purchase price, for example, those can get messed up with multiple units of measure, and based on how people receive things, you can fix your last purchase price by doing an adjust inventory worksheet. Sometimes I know that in an implementation scenario, you might do an adjust inventory worksheet to get inventory into your system in the first place. There are reasons for it, but I would say for normal everyday use, it's not the method that you want to be using to adjust inventory. Okay, so I'm going to pause for a minute, and we're at our 10-minute break period. So we're going to do a 10-minute break, and then come back at 5 till and start again. So grab some coffee, grab some bagels, drop your business cards in the buckets at the back, and talk to our sponsors real quick, please. Okay, so moving right along. So the next thing that we're going to discuss is bins. So bins in NetSuite is a way to identify different locations in a warehouse, but there are also other uses for bins, which I'll mention in a second. So bin management identifies places in your warehouse where you store inventory items. Bins help you track on-hand quantities, and the tracking items by bins can help organize receiving items and simplifying picking items to fulfill orders. So bins, you can have each item can be assigned and put in one bin, or one bin can have multiple items in it, and I'll show you a visual example here in a minute. And let's see, so also each location can have a preferred bin per item. So if you have different bins, each of your locations has different bins, you can have a preferred bin for each location. But if you have a preferred bin, that also means that you can have non-preferred bins. So that means that you can have inventory items, the same item, in different bins in your warehouse. And NetSuite will track where those bins are, or how many items are in each of those bins in your warehouse. Bin numbers can be alpha, numeric, or alphanumeric, okay? So one example of an alphanumeric bin number is, we would say bin number AFE05. So A might represent like a whole section of your warehouse, like 20 rows worth of, or more rows worth of area. F would be the specific row within those 20 rows. And then within F, you would have maybe 6 sets of shelves, and then E would be the shelf. Yeah, so E would be the set of shelves, and then 05 would be the shelf number, okay? And there's all kinds of ways you can use bins, but this is just one example of how to use them. So here's an example. So you can see on this tiny little barcode right here, this is that same structure. So this, let's say this is shelf E within row F in section A, and then this would be shelf 5, right? So this is an example where you have one bin, and so each shelf represents one bin. So this has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 different items in it. And this is actually from, this is a photo from AvidMax, which they're here today. So you guys probably see that every day. Here's another example of, let's see, bins where you might have only one item per bin. So the bin might be small enough that only one item fits in there, but that doesn't mean you still can't put more than one item type in this bin, but it's just another example of how bins can be set up. I've also seen bins be used to represent different locations, and it's a very specific use case. But basically, one bin might represent a warehouse in Kansas versus a warehouse in Seattle, and they can be used that way as well. In that use case, they have like a geolocation system working so that it'll fulfill from the closest warehouse location, and they use bins because they're a little bit more flexible for that specific use. The point is, you don't have to use bins like this. You can use them kind of any way you want, but it's basically designed to identify a sublocation within a location. So one of the advantages of having bins is that you can use bins with RF scanners. And so this is just an example of one application on a scanner where you can see it shows the bin number, it shows the item number, it might show the display name code. And these scanners, when you have a barcode on a bin, then you can use these RF scanners to help you make sure that you're picking the product from the correct place, or you're telling the system, I'm taking this product from this bin, and then NetSuite is decrementing the quantity from that bin. So there are some ramifications of using bins. So bin put away worksheet. This is a worksheet that you typically will use if bins are enabled and you're using them in your warehouse. So if items get received without assigning a bin at the time of item receipt, then you would use a bin put away worksheet that lets you put away multiple items to their preferred bin automatically. So you can have multiple bins, and remember I said you can have a preferred bin. So when you do a bin put away worksheet, basically you have items in a warehouse, but they're not assigned to a bin location. Ideally, when you are receiving items into a warehouse, you're assigning a bin location at the time of item receipt, and maybe that's a temporary location, and then you're transferring it to another location later on. But if you don't use, well, I'll talk about that in a second. So a bin put away worksheet allows you to take those items that aren't assigned to any bin and then put them into a bin, so that NetSuite knows how to then function with those items. Input to print out a list of the items, and so that you know where to put them away. So if you're not using an RF scanner system, you can use this, and this is kind of a manual method of doing it. There are some companies that help with warehouse management. RF Smart is one that's local here in town, and they're also here today. And they have a really great system to help facilitate a lot of this, but they use, they tie in with the NetSuite bin system, and they use these scanners to help make things a lot more efficient in your warehouse. So when using bins, most inventory-based transactions will require a bin. So the items must be in a bin for those transactions to work. One example is item fulfillments. So if you have some items and they're not assigned to a bin, and you have a sales order for those items, you can't actually fulfill or create an item fulfillment until those items are associated with the bin. Basically, NetSuite will give you an error, then you have to go to the bin put away worksheet, put them away, and then you can create the item fulfillment. But some of the transactions will be blocked if you're not selecting a bin at the time of that transaction. So that's just one thing to be aware of. If you have bins enabled, it's going to be required in a lot of scenarios. And bins can also be enabled and disabled per item. So if you have problems, you can turn the use bins checkbox off on individual items. So any questions on bins? They're pretty straightforward. Bins are kind of a dumb record. And by that, I mean they don't have like a lot of logic to them. They're just kind of a record with a place, and then you can assign a quantity to it. NetSuite doesn't have a lot of built-in analytics around bins. It's hard to figure out if a bin is being used or not. So you might end up with a whole bunch of bins over time that don't have any product, like old bins you're not using anymore. And it's just kind of a manual process to clean all of that up. Okay, we will move on. So we're going to talk about inventory transfers versus transfer orders. So I mentioned this a little bit earlier, what a transfer order is. So an inventory transfer is a simple transaction to move inventory from one location or warehouse to another. No other records are created in this process. So an inventory transfer, you would bring up the transfer, you would choose a from and a to location, you choose the product, you choose the quantity and an amount. You can change it if you want, but you should probably just leave it as the default value that pops up. And then you save the record, and it effectively moves the inventory from one location to another. If you're using bins, you can typically choose the bin. Well, if you have to choose the bin on the from part, and then typically you have to choose a bin on the to part as well if you're using bins in that other location. So an inventory transfer is a standalone record. There's no other records required in this process. So an inventory transfer order is a little bit different. So if you think about a sales order has a flow of records. So basically a sales order is created, and then from there an item fulfillment is created, and then from there a cash sale or an invoice is created. So there's other records that are tied to that sales order process. So an inventory transfer is similar, where it has some of these other records that happen as well. So an inventory transfer order triggers a series of events facilitating moving inventory from one warehouse to another. Some elements of a transfer order is that you can have a transfer, you can have a shipping method, and you can have a ship to location. So if you're doing just an inventory transfer, you might be actually physically sending it to a different warehouse in another state. Well, an inventory transfer isn't tracking any of those costs associated with that transfer. With the transfer order, you can track those costs that are associated with that transfer. So let's say, for example, your transfer cost, you wanted to build in an extra cost of maybe a labor cost, and you can build that into a transfer cost of that product. So that can be your transfer cost for the product. You can have also then shipping methods, and you can have other line items on those inventory transfers as well. So an inventory transfer, first of all, an item fulfillment is first created to remove the inventory from the current warehouse. So in a sales order, you're creating an inventory fulfillment to remove that inventory and ship it to a customer. Except for in this case, you're not shipping it to a customer, you're shipping it to yourself, just a different location, okay? So you still need to create an item fulfillment that's removing it from one location. Then you're physically sending it to the new location, and at the new location, then you create an item receipt. So the item receipt is like if you were going to purchase product, you have to create an item receipt to get that inventory into that warehouse location. So this is the same thing, except for you're purchasing it from yourself, and you have to do an item receipt to get that inventory into the new location. So this process is designed to be able to track inventory movement between physical locations, and then have associated costs with that transfer go along with it as well. If items in the to be transferred are not, if the items to be transferred are not in the from location, then a back order will be created. So same thing if you think about a sales order. If you have a sales order for inventory that you don't have on hand, NetSuite's going to create a back order for that inventory. And so when inventory eventually comes in and gets received into that warehouse, then in theory, NetSuite will commit that new inventory to whatever's back ordered. A transfer order works the same way. You can say, once inventory hits this warehouse, I know that we need to ship it to a new warehouse or to a new location. So you can create a back order so that the items get automatically associated to that transfer order. They'll get committed to a transfer order the same way they get committed to a sales order. Now, there's different ways to have commitments happen in NetSuite. You can have commitments happen automatically. You can have them happen on a scheduled basis, or you can make it so that you have to commit things manually. So when I say commit, that's kind of a loose term. It just depends on how you're using commitment in NetSuite. So then when the item is received, it'll get automatically committed to the inventory transfer, and then it can be physically sent to the new location. Yes, sir.
You're using a transfer order to transfer inventory from one location to another that are also different subsidiaries. Will it create intercompany transactions associated with it?
It should, yes. I'd probably have to dig in a little bit to answer that question thoroughly, but yeah, you can transfer, between subsidiaries, and it does the correct transactions for that. Yes. Yeah. 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 Okay. So before we move on, any questions about transfer orders or inventory transfers? Okay. So next we'll talk about importing and exporting inventory. And I'll go into a demo here in a minute to show a little bit about this. So CSV imports are a way to import either new transactions into NetSuite or to import changes to transactions or changes to records or create new records in NetSuite, to create new item records. So some basics around importing as it relates to inventory. If you're going to create a kit or package, kit/package item, those kit components have to be uploaded using multiple files. So the way that NetSuite does it is you have one file that has basically the name of the kit package, and then you'll have another file that identifies the member items of that kit package, and it has to be done in a two-step process. And so it does take a little bit of experimentation if you're trying to import those kit package records into NetSuite, or if you're trying to change the components or members. So this will apply to item groups and assemblies as well. They typically have to be done in multiple file types. And then to change those, you basically have to overwrite or delete the current items or member items and components, and then reassign the new components to it. So you can create an upload template in Excel and then create a matching saved CSV import to save the mapping between the template and NetSuite fields. And this is really a best practice. If you have one type of import that you do on a regular basis, maybe you're updating product data, or you're updating vendor costs, or you're updating just attributes on those items, and you're doing it the same way every time, create an Excel template that has the exact same column headers every time, and then create a saved CSV import in NetSuite. And so you upload that Excel file, and then you match it to that saved CSV import, and then NetSuite will remember all of the settings for that saved CSV import. And I'll show you that here in a minute. So that's a best practice if you're doing a lot of CSV importing into NetSuite. So for exporting, you can also export all of the item data out of NetSuite. Exports can be done from an item list view, or you can create a saved search and export that way. You can also use reports and export the data out of custom reports. The fields to be exported are whatever you see on the screen. So if there's a field that you want brought out into an Excel file, you need to add that field to either your list view or your save search to view it on the screen, and then export it from there. So once you export, you can manipulate the data and then re-import those changes all through CSV file types. NetSuite does not support Excel or any other file types like text tab delimited. It has to be a CSV file type. So some other inventory related import options: you can import an inventory adjustment. You can import an inventory transfer. And I believe you can also import an inventory transfer order. I think once upon a time you couldn't, but then there was an update, and now you can import an inventory transfer, or inventory transfer order, I should say. So these can be a little bit tricky when you're importing records and transactions into NetSuite. Sometimes they require a little bit of trial and error. You can always delete the record you import if you mess it up through trial and error. But like I said, the best practice is once you figure out how to get things to import correctly, make an Excel template and make a matching save CSV import so that you don't have to spend time guessing and figuring out how to get things importing into NetSuite correctly. So I'm going to jump over to our NetSuite account here, and I'll go and I'll just show you what the CSV import process looks like. So we're going to go to Setup, and then Import, Export, and then Import CSV Records. Some of the other functions that are available here are you can view the CSV import status. So when you upload a CSV file, if there's a lot of records that you're uploading to, it may take some time. I believe there is a 25,000 line limit on CSV imports. So if you have more than 25,000 items or transactions that you're uploading to, you have to break it into separate imports. And so this is where you'd go to see the status of that import. The next one down here is the saved CSV import. So if you save a CSV mapping, this is where you go to access that saved CSV import later on. And then there's some CSV import preferences here. And frankly, I've never found a need to change any of those preferences. It would be very, very specific, so I'm not going to go into those. But basically, we'll go into the import CSV records, and I'll show you what this process looks like. And just remember, when you're doing, I've heard some folks tell me before that they're nervous about using a CSV import because they're just not sure really what's happening or what it's doing. Whatever you're doing, if you're creating a new record, you can always delete that record in most cases, unless it has dependent records. But if you just do it right away, there's no dependent records, you can always delete those records afterwards. But really the rule of thumb is whatever is in that Excel file, that's what's going to be happening to the records in NetSuite, and based on how you do the mapping here. So this first one is the import type, and so this is the basically the categories of record types in NetSuite. So we have accounting import options, custom record options, employees. There's all kinds of things. Here's your transactions. So under transactions, if you're going to import sales orders or cash sales or invoices or anything like that, that's going to be under your transactions part. But for now, we're going to go to the items. And then in the items import type, there's a bunch of record types that we now specify. So at the top of the list here is your inventory item. If you're uploading to an item group, you have to choose item group. If you're uploading to a kit or package or an assembly item, those are here at the top. So the thing about this is, if you have, let's just say you're changing pricing on items, right? Maybe a retail price. And you have inventory items and kit package items in the same CSV file. So that's okay, but what's going to happen is you can only choose one record type at a time when you do the CSV import. So let's say you have 100 inventory items and you have 50 kit packages. When you upload that file of 150 lines and you upload it to the inventory item, it's going to show 100 records imported correctly and 50 failed. And the 50 that failed are the kit package. So what you would then do is you would go back in, you would upload that same file as a kit package record type, and then 50 will succeed and 100 will fail, right? And that 100 that fails, you know that those were already uploaded, and that's okay. It's not changing anything on those records if it fails. So just be aware, if you have different item types in the same file, you have to do multiple uploads based on that record type. So I'm going to go into the inventory item. I don't ever change this, and I don't ever change this. Oh, so you can change, yeah, so you can do a different delimiter in your CSV file. That's just asking for a whole world of headache. I would just do regular CSV and leave it at that. Okay, so then we'll select our file, and I just have just a sample file I have here. So I'm going to choose the file. I'm going to, if you have multiple files like I was talking about with kit and packages, and you're making kit packages, or if you're assigning member items to kits and packages, you would have to use a multiple file options here. And so if you're doing, so these are optional. You can upload item pricing, bin numbers, vendors. You can do all of that from a separate file if you want to. But when you start doing multiple files, like weird stuff starts happening. So you have to like trial and error sometimes to get those to work correctly. So one file is what we're doing right now. We'll go to next. And on the next screen here, we have 3 options. We can add new records, we can update new records, and we can add or update based on if they exist in the system or not. I would recommend the add or update, like if you're not 100% sure what's going on in your Excel file, that can cause some unforeseen issues. Like you may be adding product that you thought was there already, but it's not, or it keyed on the wrong thing. So I would typically only do the add option or the update option, not the add or update option, based on what you're doing. So if you're creating new records in NetSuite, you're going to do an add. If you're changing fields on an existing record, then you're going to do the update. Under the advanced options, I'm not going to go through all of these. One thing that I will mention is this overwrite missing fields option. So in your Excel file, if you have, let's say you have 100 line items and you have, a bunch of different columns, but then the value in those columns, in some of them is blank, but it's populated for some other fields. NetSuite will by default ignore the ones that are blank. However, if you check this box and say overwrite missing fields, if the value is blank in the Excel file, NetSuite will overwrite it to be blank on the record as well. So if you're trying to erase data on the record in NetSuite, you have to check this box, overwrite missing fields. Okay. And then if you're doing kit packages or changing those, that's this overwrite sublists is where you would use that, because that's a sublist of a kit package. Most of the time, you don't have to look at those advanced options if you're just doing some basic changes. So I'm going to click on update and go next. And so what the system is doing now is it's pulling the Excel file, and on the left-hand side, it's looking at all of the different fields, the column headers that are in my Excel file, and then it's showing me on the right-hand side all of the different fields in NetSuite that I can upload to on an item record. So these are all the fields related to an item record. In this scenario, you can see that in this Excel file, we have an internal ID and an external ID. You only need one of those to upload. Sometimes, though, in your exports, you don't have the internal ID. So you either have to go in and find the internal ID for everything and then match it up to your Excel file, or if you have assigned your external IDs to be basically a duplicate of your inventory number, then NetSuite can key on the external ID uploading as well. So you would only need one or the other. If the field in your Excel file is the same name as a field in NetSuite, it's going to auto match those fields. So over here on the left-hand side, you can see this little green checkbox. That means that NetSuite matched it, or it's mapped, okay? If I want to do custom mapping, what we would do then is I would take this field and I can drag it over, and then I can find the field that I want to upload it to. And maybe I'll just say I want that to be my display name code. So now you can see that this WooCommerce SKU is mapped because it has a little green checkbox. And then the display name code on the right-hand side is faded out, meaning it's been mapped as well. So you can only map one-to-one when you're doing this upload. If you have a lot of fields in your Excel file that you're mapping to different fields in NetSuite, you don't want to have to do this mapping all of the time. So this is when you would create an Excel template and then a matching save CSV import. So what I could do at this point is I could map all of these other fields if I wanted to, and then I would go to next, and I can save my import map name. So I would type in a name that says maybe WooCommerce SKU updates, and that way I don't have to do this mapping every time. ideally, like you use this for when you have a whole bunch of fields that you need mapped. The other thing is that you can take one field in your Excel file and map it to different places in NetSuite. So maybe you have the name of the brand, but in NetSuite you have brand and manufacturer, and you need it just to go to both places because they're used differently. Then you can map it, this one field, to 2 different places or more places on the NetSuite record. Does that make sense? Okay. So if you were going to save this, you would do a save and run. Or if you're not going to run it, you could just save the mapping right now. Or if you're not going to save it, then you would just hover and run, and then it'll perform that upload. I am not going to do that right now because, well, actually I'll do it because I think it'll probably just error out on everything because this file doesn't match anything in NetSuite. So I'll just go ahead and run so that we can see what this looks like. The pop-up message says data you entered on this page has not been saved and will be lost. So I'm not saving this import, which I know I'm not doing that, so I'm just going to hit OK. So once you're done with that part, it takes you to the confirmation screen. And then right here, you can click on the import job status, or you can go back to setup, import, export, and then view CSV import status. I always just go to it right from here, unless I have a whole bunch of files to upload at one time. And so you can see here's the status. If it were not completely done, there would be a % complete. And you can see that my status here is 0 of 44 records imported successfully. And that's because I knew that these items in this Excel file, they don't exist in NetSuite, and I did update, not add. So I did an update, but they don't exist, so it errored out. Yes?
What is the benefit of doing imports? Is it so then you can...
Well, let's say what's the benefit of doing imports? If you have 100 or more records, you have a lot of records that you need to modify. So option 1 is to go to that record, click edit, change the values, hit save, and then repeat until all of your products are updated or your transactions are updated. Or you can have all of it built in an Excel file, and you can update all of those records all at the same time with the import.
So for instance, could you use this for fulfillment?
To create item fulfillments?
Or to fulfill against inventory, so to fulfill certain lock codes.
I'm not sure if you could use it in that scenario. I think you can create item fulfillments via import. I'm pretty sure. Some record types you can't upload to. Cash refunds, you can't import, just FYI. I don't know, it's weird. But I don't think it could facilitate something like that. Like there has to be a record either already existing that you're doing something to, or you're creating a new record in this upload process. Yep. Okay. Okay, so the other thing about the job status page is I can click on this CSV response, and then I can open up this file and I can say, oh geez, what did I do wrong? Nothing uploaded. And then NetSuite gives you a reason. And sometimes the reasons are kind of like PC load letter. What's that? But sometimes they make sense. So in this case, it says could not find record with internal ID equals this. So that means in NetSuite, there's no records in NetSuite with that internal ID. Conversely, if you use external ID to key on, it'll say could not find record with external ID. If your import is successful, it doesn't give you a file to look at. It just says 44 records updated successfully. Sometimes those error messages, I don't mean what they seem to be meaning, and so you kind of have to dig in and figure out what's going on. Go back, analyze your Excel file. So this over here, these are all the fields that are in this Excel file. So I had all of these field values here, and then so these are the internal and external IDs, and then all the values I was trying to upload into NetSuite. So if you get an error, so when you do the CSV imports, always go to the import status to make sure it uploaded correctly. Okay. Exporting is very straightforward. Let's say we want to bring up a list of all of our items. So you can do this like in a saved search, or you can just go to an item list. You can add different fields to the view here, and then there's a CSV export or an Excel export or a PDF export option. So whatever you export is what you're going to see on the screen at that time. Then you can put it into an Excel file, manipulate the data, turn around and upload it back into NetSuite if you want to. So CSV importing is, I think, a very critical tool when working with inventory, especially if you don't want to have to be updating records one at a time. You're adding a whole bunch of different items at one time. I think it's something that you should definitely look at. So we'll take a look at inventory management, and I think I have 10 minutes. So we'll see where we end up here. I probably won't get to my bonus material today. So inventory management, first of all, we have these inventory management preferences. And the preferences determine how NetSuite calculates your inventory levels based on demand. And the demand that it's using is based on either sales orders or cash sales in NetSuite. If you don't use cash sales, then you need to use sales orders to calculate your demand. So this is the built-in capabilities for NetSuite to say, well, you sold this much in this amount of time. This is how much we think you need to have in stock to keep selling products and not run out of them. There are some drawbacks to the NetSuite system. It's very, I'd say, simple calculations. There are other products out there that have more sophisticated algorithms that do these types of things, and so there's definitely a lot of other ways to do this, but the built-in system in NetSuite works okay. So inventory management preferences, they use a lead time and a safety stock per warehouse. So these are values that it uses in calculations when it's determining when to order products, how much to order, and when to order and how much to order. The lead time NetSuite calculates based on how long it takes you to submit a PO and then receive that product off of that PO. So the lead times are automatically or can be automatically calculated. You can also hard code in lead times. So if you know, let's say you have a factory overseas and you know it takes 3 months as your standard lead time, you can code in 3 months or 90 days lead time, or you can let the system calculate it for you as well. So in the inventory management preferences, you can set these defaults, but you can also have these set at the per item level. So the defaults happen when there's nothing set at the item level. So these are the standard preferences, and I don't know. Yeah, after this, I'll go in and I'll show you where this is in the system. So we have default lead time. So this is, you can put in a default number, a default safety stock. A safety stock is the amount of inventory that you don't ever want to go under. You want to make sure you have this much inventory at all times. You don't want to sell out of that. Now, that in a perfect world, that would work, but it sometimes doesn't. Your default preferred stock level is how many days of inventory on hand that NetSuite, you're telling NetSuite you want to have. Order analysis interval is how far back in time it looks to judge your demand. Then you also have a seasonal analysis interval, which is basically if this option is checked on your item records, your seasonal analysis will go back 1 year, and then it'll look forward, whatever your analysis interval is. So if you have seasonal products and you want to get the demand for Christmas time, but it's July right now, you can say go back 1 year and then go forward 6 months and see what the demand is for that seasonal interval. Okay, so that's kind of a specialized function of this. And then you can also set an estimated demand change. So you can say, okay, NetSuite, give me my preferred stock levels and reorder points, but I also want, but like we're killing it right now and we're up 20%, and I want you to adjust these levels by 20%. So you can estimate your demand change as an increase. You can also estimate it as a decrease on the other side of that too. So these are inventory management preferences I'll show you in a minute. Also, there's transactions to consider. It's either sales orders or cash sales. If you invoice everything, then it needs to be on sales orders. If you use sales orders and they end up as a cash sale, then you use cash sales. if you use cash sales, but you choose to use sales orders here for this setting, then it'll also take into account cash sales that may get that may not end up or that aren't closed or completely billed at that point. So cash sales is like end of the line, done deal. That's what you want to calculate on. Also, we have a day of the week and a time of day to perform calculation. So I'm going to go into the demo real quick, talk about those. So those preferences are under setup setup accounting, and then inventory management preferences. And these are, again, this functionality comes from the advanced inventory module. So so these are the settings that I just was referring to. So you can use lead time and safety stock per location. So that means if you have different locations that have different sales rates and different lead times, then you want to use that per location. You can say don't do that if you want to. You can set a default lead time, default safety stock. So this is in days. So default safety stock is saying I always want to have 7 days of inventory on hand at all times. So NetSuite is going to do its calculations and recommended stock levels based on keeping 7 days, at least 7 days of stock in hand. But then it's also going to add to that the demand change based on sales. So default preferred stock level, 30 days, that's 1 month of inventory on hand. Order analysis is saying I want to look at the last 6 months of sales. So it's going to look back 6 months and it's going to say, okay, here's my average number of sales, and then it's going to say, okay, this is what your preferred stock level and reorder point should be based on that sales, that order analysis interval. The shorter that window is, the more responsive NetSuite is to change. So if you let's say you sell on Amazon, you sell products on Amazon, and you get almost all of a sudden you get this huge spike of sales on one product. If your analysis is spread out over 6 months, the system isn't going to make this big knee-jerk reaction to a big sales spike. But if it's compressed to a one month window and you see a big sales spike, then the system is more likely to recommend more products to be on hand because of that sales spike. Does that make sense? That order analysis interval is kind of important on how this is calculating the system, those. So orders are actual sales. That's sales orders or cash sales. Day of week to perform calculation. So the system will perform the calculation basically once a week automatically. You can say the day and time. And then these two are not standard features, so I'm not going to talk about those. Are part of a supply chain management piece. You can also come in here and you can say submit and calculate, and it'll recalculate all of your stock levels at like real time right away at that point. Yes?
You said this is a part of an advanced inventory module.
Yes.
Is that something that's in addition to most standards?
Usually, it kind of depends on the edition, but sometimes it comes in with your NetSuite account and it may just not be enabled. Okay. You can go to enable features and look for advanced inventory management, okay, and see if it's available to you if you don't have these features now. Okay. If it's not available to you, it is a module you have to pay extra for. Okay. Yep. Okay, so I'm gonna go back to my slides. I'm gonna look at, so now inventory management per item. So on the item records, we have a preferred stock level, a reorder point, a lead time, and then we have these boxes that say auto calculate these for me. There's also the seasonal demand, which you can turn on or turn off per item. You have a reorder multiple option and a safety stock level as well. So I'm gonna go, let's see. So auto calculate reorder point. So basically, the reorder point is when the system says, okay, you need to order more. So you're selling products, you're selling, you get down to the quantity listed on your reorder point, and then NetSuite says, hey, time to reorder more. That's the reorder point. Think of it as a minimum level, right? The reorder, with safety stock defined, the reorder point is the average lead time in days times the demand. Demand is calculated based on your sales over the amount of the analysis interval. So with safety stock defined in days, so safety stock can be defined in days or by a quantity. With safety stock defined in days, the reorder point equals the average lead time in days plus the safety stock days times the demand. So these are the algorithms that NetSuite is using to calculate these. And I say, you know, they're not very complicated, because once you get into systems that do this a lot better, their algorithms are, you know, like these huge calculus formulas that do these crazy things. I don't even know, but they're a lot more sophisticated than this. With safety stock quantity defined, the reorder point is average lead time in days times the demand plus the safety stock quantity. So here's one best practice for safety stock quantity, is that if you just start using the these auto calculation pieces and you don't have any sales history on your products yet, NetSuite will never say it'll never make your preferred stock level more than 0. So if you know that you want to have at least one on hand, even though you don't have any sales history, set your safety stock quantity to 1. And then the system will say, at the bare minimum, you need to have 1 in stock. If you don't have any sales history, if you just implemented NetSuite, NetSuite will not be able to calculate sales history on anything, because there's no information for it to calculate on. So another best practice with all of these calculations is to wait 3, 4, 6, 12 months before you turn this on, and so that you can get some sales history before NetSuite can start calculating it. There are other systems out there that can start those calculations based on historical information outside of NetSuite at a go live type of timing. So one thing that I want to here, actually, I'm just going to show you real quick on an item record in NetSuite. And I'm running out of time, but I think that's my last slide. So down here, see, we have under our inventory management section, we have a preferred stock level. Auto calculate preferred stock level, auto calculate reorder point. There's also a reorder multiple. So if you can only buy products in multiples of 2 or maybe multiples of 12, you can say my reorder multiple is this, and that way when you go to reorder them, it'll only give you multiples of whatever you have put in there. Otherwise, it'll do onesies. And then at the bottom line here, per location, you can see our reorder point, our preferred stock level, our lead time, and our safety stock level. So that's where you would see those values starting to populate based on NetSuite's calculations. The last thing that I want to mention is that auto calculate and preferred stock levels, there's a little bit of what I consider a bug. And NetSuite says, yeah, this is the way it's supposed to work, but I think it's ridiculous. So this is my red flag. So NetSuite calculates new levels only when there's activity on the SKU. So if there's a gap in sales history, then the levels will not get recalculated. This can cause issues with accurate stock levels, specifically overstocking items that you shouldn't be stocking anymore because there are no sales. So a long period with no sales does not mean NetSuite will decrease the preferred stock levels. There has to be some sort of activity. So let's say hypothetically, you start selling an item, you have your order analysis interval is 3 months, and you're selling it, everything's happy, NetSuite's calculating levels, but then for some reason you stop selling it, but you still have inventory on hand. You stop selling it for 3, 4, 5 months. Until there's a new transaction, NetSuite will not recalculate those reorder points and preferred stock levels on those items. So it doesn't take into account no sales, which to me is like, what? How do you, like, it should be calculating going down the other way as well as when it goes back up. But that's just something to be aware of if you use this. Yes, you can absolutely manually override those reorder points and preferred stock levels. You can go in and manually change them, and then NetSuite won't update them until there's sales history or transactions to update it against. But yes, you can absolutely manually go in and modify those. So you want some sort of balance and check process to, as long as you understand that that's a possibility. And that happens. I've seen it happen where a company gets overstocked on a product, they stop selling it, and NetSuite will actually tell you to order more, back up to your preferred stock level, even though you haven't had sales in 4 months, where it should be saying don't order anymore, right? Okay, so that was my, yes ma'am. It does not take into account inventory transfers. This is only sales orders, cash sales. It's only taking, yeah, into account transactions, like selling the products. Okay, so I am a little over time, so I'm going to say thank you for now, and we're going to do a little bit of a transition. We'll take another 10-minute break, and then we're going to have Margie Komninos come up. And then again, I had this bonus material, purchase order to payment process, and then drop shipping and special order. The slides are in my slide deck. I'm going to post them on our website, so you guys can go in and see all of that stuff later on. So thank you all very much. Well, we could do the drawings at the end of this break, or we could do them at the end of your, yeah, let's do them at the end of this break. So you have one more opportunity to go put your business cards in the buckets in the back, and then we'll do the drawings, and then we'll have Margie come up.
Show of hands. Anybody going, I don't know what cycle counting is, would like to know about it. Okay. Anybody use inventory adjustments? Okay, if you use inventory adjustments and you're not using cycle counting, you might be very interested in this feature. It wasn't fully baked a couple years ago, but it has really come a long way, and there's a lot of things, and I love it. It's so, and then we're going to talk about landed costs. Does anybody here not know what landed costs are? Anybody here not know? Everybody use landed costs? Can I see a show of hands of people that use landed costs? Okay. Can I see a show of hands of people that have inventory? Okay. So if you have inventory and you're not using landed costs, you will be very interested in this section. All right. Then we're going to dig deeper into assembly items. I know that Cory covered it partially. I'm going to talk a little bit, explore it a little bit more deeply and say what's the difference, and then a little bit about serialized assembly items and how they differ. Then I'm going to go into work orders, and then finally, your final CPE keyword for any of you that want CPE credits. For those of you that want CPE credits and didn't get your form, they're sitting back on the sign-in table, so please get that. Oh. The next thing I want to talk about, I'm trying to get this thing off my screen. is that I actually do have the modules. And what we're going to be covering today, most of it is in the advanced inventory module, which is different than the advanced inventory management that Cory was just talking about. That, if you have the advanced inventory module, it's just a checkbox, and then you get all those features that he was last talking about. We don't like advanced inventory management in our company because what it does to the reorder points, it auto-calculates them, and we use reorder points and preferred stock levels for other things to figure out a shortage. So we didn't turn that on, and that's why we don't have all those little checkboxes that he was showing. And someone asked, well, I don't see that in mine. It's because you actually have to check advanced inventory management within the I think in the setup. So these are the things that are highlighted in yellow are the things that I'm going to be talking about today. And the only thing that I've put down here at the bottom, can you see my cursor? No, that's interesting. Is there a way people can see my cursor? Anybody know?
Take it off presenter view. Yeah, it's powered to screen.
Oh.
Because it's the other. Yeah, I don't know.
Oh, okay. Well, I guess I won't be able to point. Just use my finger. The engineering change management is highlighted, not because I'm going to go into it, but that sort of goes hand in hand with something called advanced bill of materials. Anybody here use assembly items? Okay. Who uses advanced bill of materials? Who wants to know more about advanced bill of materials? Okay, because I really dug into it this time. Because I'm in my release preview. How many people are like me and don't have a sandbox? Okay, so that release preview is your temporary sandbox. Use it. And especially if you want to explore advanced inventory, advanced bill of materials, definitely explore it. As if you're like us, for our environment, because we've been using NetSuite for so many years, it is not a good fit right now, partially because it's not fully baked, and I'll be talking about that a little bit later. But the engineering change management, if you use advanced bill of materials, it's essential. So then you need the supply chain management bundle. It's free. I don't know if you have to ask for it being provisioned or if you just install it. So and so this, I just wanted you to see what you get with the advanced inventory module, what you get with the supply chain management bundle. But first, because we're not doing tips and tricks today, guess what? I'm going to give you a couple tips and tricks. The first one is, let's see, Alt, Escape, Alt Tab. Okay. Notice here that I have two windows open. Notice one's in blue, one's in red. The red one is my release preview. The blue one is my production. I'm going to be mostly working in the release preview because I'm pretending it's my sandbox, and I've modified it heavily at this point. So if you have, who's in release preview at this point? Who has a release preview in their account? Do you have the same color?
I've only had it for 2 days, but yes.
Okay, well, you might want to make the appearance differently, because if you're like me, I accidentally thought I was in my production account. So just go into the preferences, and then you go down to the appearance, and from here you simply just say the color theme, change it. And this applies to people in sandboxes. Every time your sandbox is refreshed, make sure you do the same. So that's the first tip and trick. The second one is, hey, how did you get your release preview and your production up in the same session, or in the same screen? That came out, I think, in the last 6 months. I forget I think the last release. What you do is you log into your one account, then you go up to this area up here, and you say change to a different account. You log into your other account, and in this case, we logged into our release preview, and then it logs you out of your production account or your initial account. You go, oh, well, that doesn't really work. You log back into your production account, and then you've got 2 live accounts. And it actually works with more. I've done it with 3 accounts. So it's pretty cool, pretty powerful, especially if you're in your release preview or sandbox. It's a way of seeing 2 sessions at once without having to have 2 different logins. All right, so there you go. You've got your tips and tricks for today. So I'm going to be talking about a lot of things today, and I'm not going to be going into the setup and going into enable features. So I just want to, for each one. So basically, these things are what we're going to be, you're going to need to enable these features for what we're talking about today. So just, this will be in the slide deck. In the slide deck too are a lot of things that are not going to be discussed in detail, but it's for supporting you when you actually implement any of these features we talk about today. So the only one that's not self-evident is this inventory count. Inventory count is cycle counting, and that's what we're going to be talking about now. So cycle counting, really cool. Anybody that uses an inventory adjustment, you're going to probably want this feature. The only time I would now probably want to do an inventory adjustment is like when we do repairs for instruments, and then we go, okay, well, I know I'm using one of this component, so I want to subtract one. But otherwise, cycle counting does for you what an inventory adjustment does, but with a lot less human error. So I think what it was made for was creating periodic counts of items. So you can basically say, based upon a bill of materials, or assembly item, you can say what type of item. We want to do these counts every 30 days. We want to do these counts every 60 days. And it sets it up so it's just a checklist and you check things off. And you'll see how this works. But if you don't really say, if you're a company that goes, well, we don't really know when the items will be counted. It's just, whenever we get a shortage report from maybe that location. We have a contract manufacturer. We manufacture a couple instruments in-house, but we also have a contract manufacturer, so we can't put them, they won't do that for us. So it's basically when we say we want to build 1,000 of this type of instrument, that they go, oh, you're short this. So they give us a whole list. So if you try and enter that into an inventory adjustment, what do you have to do? You have to enter in the item, then you have to enter in, it'll pop up and say, this is how many you have, and you go, oh, we have, instead of 111, they're saying we have, 102. And then you've got to figure out and do the math. You go, okay, what's the difference? That's minus how many? So that all introduces a whole opportunity for error. Now you could do a spreadsheet and then import the spreadsheet, but then you've got to do that, and you've got to make sure that no mistakes are made. And you'll see when we get to this, that is done automatically for you. You no longer have to figure out the calculations. So also, and finally, ease of an adjust inventory worksheet that Cory had talked about, but generates inventory adjustments, so it's no impact on the average cost of an item. So if you turn on cycle counting, which is nearly that checkbox that I showed you, you get 3 new fields. You get a last count date. This is locations, and this is basically saying for this location, Aspen, for, we have for this item, this is actually from an item record that you're looking at. It's saying that now we have last count date, next count date, and count interval. You enter the initial date that you want to start this. And then you enter in the count interval. That count interval is in days. And then NetSuite, you'll have this blank column, last count date. NetSuite will provide this once it does one of these cycle counts. And if count interval and next count date are not set, then you can still use this, but you actually have to enter each item. It'll still do the math for you, and we're going to show that. I'll show you how that's done in the demonstration. And if you're going, well, gosh, I don't really know what I want to do. Hey, set your count interval to 1 day. And later on, you can do a simple CSV import to change it based upon however your company wants to use it. So these are basically the 3 things you do in the setup. And I'm not going to go into that. You can read this and see what you need to do. There are 3 ways, and there are 2 ways to update the cycle counting. You can either, let me actually go back a page. You can update the individual records, but who wants to do that? You can do a CSV import. You cannot do this through a mass update. As you know, you can update records multiple ways. Like you can do individual records, you can do direct list editing from like a saved search. You can do mass updates for certain fields, or you can do CSV imports, and finally you can do workflows. If that doesn't work, you can do suite scripts. So those are all those methods. But for this, you can either do it individually, or the next level down you can do is a CSV import. It's a very simple CSV import. Cory went into that in depth. Basically, I've provided here the steps that you need to do and the mapping that you need to do. So this is the heart of the matter. This is what you need to do to get cycling. So the first thing you do is you create an inventory count, and that'll take a look and say, oh, these items are all available for an inventory count. So I'm going to show these to you, and you can check off. It provides a checkbox, and you can just check off what you want to do. Alternatively, you can do an enter inventory count, which is kind of like an inventory adjustment, but much more powerful because it eliminates that error of doing the math. And you can just enter line items. And even if you have the create inventory count, which is the automatic, you can always add line items to that too. And as I said, it's a checkbox. You can just not check those that you don't want to count. Then after you create this and save this, you push a start button. The start button is very important because at the start button, when you hit that, it basically takes a snapshot of what you have on hand. And then that's really where it starts. So you don't want to make any changes, this caution down here. Don't modify the inventory or run transactions that will modify the inventory between the start and the improved dates. So because it's, when you actually finish this whole thing, it's going to make the inventory adjustment based upon the date of when it was started, because that's when it's taking a snapshot of what that inventory is. So once in started mode, you can go ahead and edit, and this is where you enter in the quantities. Just like an inventory adjustment, you say, oh, this is how many I have. Well, actually, different than inventory adjustment, you just say, this is how many I have. You don't say, this is the difference. That's the difference between inventory adjustments and this. You actually say, this is the count, and it will figure it out. And then you can also enter the quantity. So you enter the quantity, the rate, if you're incrementing inventory. Otherwise, it's going to use the average cost. And you can enter in memo information. And then you go, you know, you don't know if it's going up or down, or maybe you do because you've printed off an inventory list of some kind through one of the saved searches or report. And so you know exactly at this point what your counts are. If you happen to enter something in that is a negative account, you can still change the rate. And you're going, well, what? You can change the rate? You shouldn't be able, when you're decrementing inventory, you should not be able to change the rate. Well, you can actually put it in there, but guess what? It's going to ignore it because it knows better. So even though you can change the rate to something else when you're decrementing, yes?
Can you change the quantity multiple times? So for instance, if 1 week a certain lot code is up 2 cases and then the next week it's down 5 cases or whatever, can you make those changes each according to the intervals that you determine, or can you only make one change to?
Even though an interval is set, you can go in at any time, and I'll show you how you do that, and you can say, ignore the intervals. I want to see all the products, so you can do that at any time. Is that answer your question?
Yeah, make unlimited changes?
Yes. Okay. Yeah. It'll keep updating the last count date.
It's gone.
What?
Until the inventory is gone.
Until the inventory is gone?
For instance.
Pardon?
Until the lot code, for instance, has been depleted.
No, it'll still show on the inventory count cycle. You know, even if it's 0, it'll still show up. This is basically like doing an inventory adjustment. Think about doing an inventory adjustment. So it'll still show on the form. It's not going to disappear once it's 0 because maybe you have more for that lot. I don't really know lots, so I don't know if lots just disappear when you've used them. And if lots disappear and they're out of inventory and they no longer show, then I guess that would go hand in hand.
What happens at my,
but at bins, they don't disappear. I mean, the bin always exists even if there's nothing in it.
Yeah, our lot codes, they disappear.
Oh, okay. So finally, when you're done, when you think you've done, you hit complete, and at that point, it calculates those differences. So the things that you had to do an inventory adjustment, done automatically, and it shows you at that point. I think the negative thing with this is when you get started, it doesn't show you what you have in stock. It just shows you this is, or what you thought you had in stock. It doesn't show you what the NetSuite is showing, that snapshot. It only shows, you only have an option to enter in what the new quantity is. So it's at the count complete, when it's completed, when the status is changed, that you can actually see what the snapshot was, and then you can see what you put in, and you can see the calculated difference. And you look at that and you go, well, that looks about right. If you see something off by like 2,000 pieces, you might go, whoa. And you can actually say, I don't approve it yet. I'm going to reject this. And it takes you back to that started cycle. Once you approve it, that is when inventory adjustments are made. And I say inventory adjustments as in plural because it will create one inventory adjustment for things that have increased quantities and another inventory adjustment for those things that are decreased. So are there any questions on that?
When you go through the approve process, say you were missing 100. Something happens during when you counted and when you're ready to approve. Those 100 that were sitting in inventory have been removed, sale order, whatever. Will it error or give you some kind of message that you can't remove them?
Well, it's going to take a snapshot at the time when you start it.
Yeah.
So that's how many it thinks you have. If you know it's different, then when you go into this, you would go back into this edit. No, it's going to subtract from that original once you hit start. So if you've had something removed or added to inventory, you're going to have to go in and manually do an inventory adjustment. You might want to remove it from that list.
But it won't tell you that something's happened to change.
Oh, no, no, it will not tell you.
Okay.
That would be nice. That would be really nice. But that's why this caution thing is here, because it does not tell you, to the best of my knowledge. Now, maybe, you know, I haven't played with this a whole lot, so, but that's why that cautionary note is there. So when you actually do the create inventory count, and we'll see this when we go through the demo, there's going to be these two fields, the count start date and the count end date. Oh, you can't see my cursor. Darn it. Cursors. So the count start date refers to the next, it's a little bit confusing because you're going, well, what is count start date and count end date? The count start date refers to the next count date. So it deals with the next count date that should occur that's been calculated, or this next count date that you see underneath in that sub list there. And then the count end date refers to the last count date. So it's going to basically say between these two dates, and it's inclusive, I want to see all those things that are up for account, all those things that are available to count at this time. If you blank out those fields, it's just going to count everything. It doesn't care. Notice here on this screenshot too, I have like component of, electronic part. You can actually customize this create inventory count to be able to filter. So like if you want to be able to say, I want to account hardware parts, you know, at one point in time, just today I only want to count the hardware parts, then it will give you just the hardware. We have a custom field that says this is a hardware part versus an electronic part. So that's important to know first. Or you can say, I just want to see components of this one instrument, you know, because we do assembly builds. So I just want to see components of this blank PSI-H instrument, and it'll just bring up those components. So you can filter what you want. Otherwise, you're just going to get one giant list. So I highly recommend that you do that. All right, let's go ahead and start demoing. So let's see where I am on time. Oh, I didn't even start it. You guys are going to have to tell me if I'm off clock. Okay, 11:15. Okay, I'm doing okay. So we're going to go into here, and let me maximize this, and then I'm going to magnify it so you all can see better. Okay. What did you do, Cory? 125 or 150?
I don't recall.
Okay. Well, you guys tell me if you need it enlarged more. So I go to transactions, excuse me, inventory, transactions inventory, and if I've turned on cycle counting, I'm going to get these two additional fields, create inventory count and enter inventory count. So we're going to go into enter inventory count, kind of like, well, you know, I haven't turned on cycle, I haven't entered in those fields for cycle counts, the next date or the interval yet, but I kind of want to use it. So you would say what location you want to work, you know, you're looking at. And then I don't know why this doesn't check automatically, but maybe there's a global setting for that. And then you would say something like headset, folding, add. Ah, look at that. It came up and gave you an error. Can you all see that? Good. Can you see it well? It came up. Why? Because I've already started a cycle count for that. Because I've started one, it says, hey, we've already got you started, so no can do, which I kind of like that feature. So let's go ahead and change this to something else. I'm going to go ahead and add these. I'm not going to bother with the memos today. Notice the inventory account populated. It doesn't do that. Anybody figure out a way to get that auto-populate when they're doing inventory adjustments? Because there's no, I didn't see a global field, a global setting. Well, I guess, but I mean, here there's a default, which is nice. And I wish they'd do that for inventory adjustments. So there, and I go ahead and say save. And at this point, it's just like doing the ones that you actually have set up those cycle count fields. So I start my count. And at this point, I edit it to put in what those counts are. So someone's actually gone in. And this is what I'm saying. It doesn't show you how many you have in stock with that snapshot, because it already took a snapshot. Why doesn't it put it in there? So I'm going to probably put an enhancement request in for that. So at this point, like maybe now I know I have 100 splitters, and maybe I have 200 of these. And maybe I know that that the rate, these are showing rates of 0, because obviously I don't even know, maybe there's no stock in there. You can change this rate here. So I could say maybe this is $2. Oh, I know why, because these are actually at a different location. That's why we don't have that stock that at this location in Aspen. And then I could say this is at 0 rate. So if I were to save this now, still doesn't show. But if I do complete count, now it shows me what the original snapshot quantity was. And because I don't actually have any of these at this location, it's saying that it showed 0, now you're saying 200, it's going to adjust to 200. So it automatically does the math for you. Now, if I approve this, if I reject this, I can go back to the start mode again, which is where it takes the snapshot. And the only thing I don't know is, could I actually change the location at this point? I don't know. I've never done that. But if I change the location, nope, can't change it. So I'd have to delete this and start a different one. So at that point, I could approve it, and it would create the inventory adjustments. Now let's do it like the normal method. You'd probably have set up cycle counting. Is there any questions on this one? Can you see the value of doing this over inventory adjustments? Yes?
Can you reject line item by line item on the approval process? Or does it have to be all or none?
All or none. You can remove those items, but you can adjust them. I mean, if you reject it, you go back in and you correct that one line item, and then you approve the whole transaction. So now we're going to go in and we're going to go back in and I'm going to say create. Create inventory count. I like using pages rather than drilling down all the time. So now here, if I put in a location, and you can see it's saying count start date, count end. It put it in automatic. I'm not sure if it put it in automatically or if I already had that and it was just sort of in cache. But I've said component of this assembly item, I've said these are the hardware parts. This is where I'm saying you can customize. You can filter and show additional fields. There's not a lot you can do. It's not like editing a form. There's only certain fields that are available. But if I go ahead and it says the next count date is 9/16, which falls within that range. If I were to say 10/30, notice I have other things that show up because these were already counted on the these were already counted in the next, these cycles were set to 30. So the next count date really isn't supposed to be until 10/14. So, and then if I just were to remove both of these, I would get everything. And I think it just shows the same in this case, but this is how I would get all my parts. And so, like I said, if you have, I only have a few hardware parts because I haven't done this for all our products. This was just for the demonstration. But if I were to say, you know, I want to see all parts, the list would be endless. So at this point, I can just select certain items. If I know an item is going to have a change or could potentially have a change, then I might not include that in here. So I'll just select 3 items. I'm going to submit them. So the last count date was 9/14. It's going to change that last count date to 9/18, and then it's going to say 30 days from 9/18 would be the next count date in the inventory item itself. So I'm going to start my count. I'm going to go ahead. It's now started mode. I'm going to edit it. I'm going to say that the count quantity here is 3,000. I'm going to say that this quantity is 240. And this is 423. If something hasn't changed, it just won't show up on the inventory adjustment. So if the count matches what the snapshot shows. So I'm going to go ahead and save this. And once again, notice you can change the rates. We don't know if they're incrementing or decrementing, but just know that if you change a rate at this point, it will ignore it if it ends up decrementing, and it will take it if it ends up incrementing. I'm going to go ahead and complete my count. When I complete it, you can see that, oh gosh, I had 2 that were actually right on. I didn't know that. Yeah. And I'm going to go ahead and approve it. At this point, that's when the inventory adjustments are made.
So does it send you a notification when the 30 days, this is a manual process that you have to do, right? Putting in the numbers that your, for instance, your manufacturer is giving you. So does it just let you know when the 30 days has expired and you're supposed to do the count?
That's a good question. The question was, how do you know when the 30 days, when you need to do the next cycle count? I would probably create a safe search. I don't think there's something inherent, but if someone knows something different, because we don't actually use it for cycle counting, but the best of my knowledge is you might need to do a safe search and then have a, you know, have an email sent to you or something.
Okay. Because they're not, unless you go in here manually and change the quantities, they're just taking a snapshot of whatever your inventory says in the system.
Yes, and it's changing that next date based upon that interval date.
Correct.
Yeah. So.
Is the snapshot
quantity available or the quantity?
The snapshot is the quantity on hand, definitely. So, and then if I go to, I think, let's see, I approved this, and oops, and I think at this point you should go to the history tab, because you're going, well, what inventory adjustments were made? You go to the history tab, and then you go to inventory adjustments, and because there was only a negative inventory created, this is the inventory adjustment that was actually generated from that. So it's very cool. To me, it's very powerful. I'm really excited about it. I don't know if anybody else is. Anybody excited about it?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Can you adjust by lot as well?
I don't know lots.
Okay.
I know you can with bins. I don't have lots enabled, so I can't answer that question. Anybody can answer the question? She's asking if this will work with lots.
Yes, it will.
Okay, great. There's your answer. Yes, it will.
It does not work with multiple inventory status.
Okay, well, I don't. Oh, yeah. There's so many bugs with the inventory statuses that we did not go there.
So if you have the rolled out inventory status, I think it was 2018-2, so I can have my inventory as available or locked or damaged. So then when I go to create orders, I can't use that inventory. But if you go to count a damaged good, then it will automatically count it as available right now. So use the status feature. It's no bug, and they said NetSuite said that they're going to fix it. But just kind of like gotcha.
There's a lot of bugs with the inventory status. It treats things like bins. I mean, so we just didn't implement it. But all right, I need to move on because I actually am running behind. Surprise, surprise. Seems to happen to me every time. Landed costs, understanding landed costs. Who here doesn't understand landed costs and going, what is it? Okay, you actually do know what landed cost is, because when you go to order a book online, you look at the price of the book and you look at the price of the shipping. And because that's the price you're paying. Because that's why Amazon Prime is so nice. You don't need to do those calculations. Even though you might end up paying more, you still don't have to do those calculations. Plus you get it in 2 days. So anybody that thinks they don't know landed costs, do know landed costs. Why is it, what does it mean in NetSuite? In NetSuite, it means that it's the true cost of that inventory component. So if you have, widget 1, and you end up, it costs $5, but it costs, you order 10 of them and it costs $5 for shipping and it costs $4.50 for handling. All of those things really are part of the cost of that product. And if you don't use landed costs, you're doing a great disservice to your company, because you don't know, you might be selling it thinking you have a certain profit margin based upon the purchase price you had. And if you don't take into account the landed cost, your profit is not really what you think it is. So you need to use landed cost, 1, to get the true value of the cost of an item, to know what your profit is, and then also for pricing. Because when you look at the price that you want to sell something for, if you don't take into account all those other costs associated with it, then you really might have some challenges if your company is looking at certain profit margins. So once again, it kind of goes back to that. And then if you do assembly items, which we do, because we buy a lot of capacitors and resistors, and they're 0.0012356 cents per piece, but we buy them in the thousands. But still, it matters, because those little fractions of pennies add up. And when you've got an assembly item, you've got a component that's made of 100 items, and each one of those 100 items does have some shipping associated with it. It adds up. So I highly recommended landed costs for most companies if you've got actual inventory, physical inventory. So examples of landed costs might be the shipping costs. It might be the handling costs, duties. Also, one of the things that we actually include in ours is the vendor setup fees that you want included in the value of an item. So when we order decals or labels for our instruments, there's a price per label, but then there's a $75, $150 setup fee. And we actually want that incorporated because really that's part of that item. Now, the negative is that you can't expense it. So say you have those labels and they're going to stick around for 4 years. Well, now you've got basically 4 years that you're going to be, you know, that you won't be able, you'll expense it over the 4 years versus expensing it right away if you said into shipping. Or into, you know, if you put your setup and just expensed it right away. So landed cost, this is just kind of a screenshot. We'll actually be demoing this. But I wanted you to see that this is an item receipt. And on the item receipt, you see the landed cost tab. It's then underneath it are something called a cost allocation method, and we'll be getting into that. Basically, you're saying, you know, I've got 20 instruments that are 20 parts that I've ordered. Do I want to divide this up, the shipping and the handling? Do I want to divide that among the 20? Do I want to do it upon the weight of the product? Do I want to do it upon the value of the product, what it costs, and divide it up that way? So you have different options for that. But notice these things that say shipping, duty charge, handling charge, second shipping charge. These are all things that you set up, and we'll go over the setup on that shortly. These are what I call they're landed cost categories in NetSuite. I call them queues. So these are basically the queues that you get to use. And what this impacts is when you're on an item receipt, this impacts, when you select this, there's an expense account associated with it. And it basically, here on the GL impact that you can see, it actually credits the landed cost category. So there's a bit to set up in this. Once it's set up, it's really simple to use. So that was an inventory receipt. Then this is a landed cost example for a bill at the billing end of it. And this is assuming you're doing sort of like a PO item receipt. Just so you know, you can actually have a bill, no PO, no item receipt, and you can actually increment inventory that way too. You don't actually have to have a PO to an item receipt. So it all depends whether, you know, how you have it set up, you know, whether you've got advanced receiving turned on, advanced billing turned on, and whether or not you just get a bill at the end from the vendor or whether you do the PO. But sometimes you might do both, which we do at our company. On the bill, you actually have to enter in a new item that you're going to be creating called landed cost. And that item is going to go along with your other items. So you're going to have like touch probe, you know, that's an item, and then you're going to have this landed cost item. And then you can see the GL impact on this, that it actually debits landed cost. So it essentially is going to reverse the other entry. So at the end of a period in time, when you have an item receipt and a bill, that account is going to be 0. So landed cost setup. It requires 5 things to set up. The easy things are enable features. You want to create this number 2, create landed cost account in the chart of accounts. So you're going, well, I already have a shipping account. Why in the world do I need to create another one? The reason why is because you always want this to eventually, in the chart of accounts be to 0. And it's for auditing purposes. And you can see if you've made any mistakes. So you want to set up expense accounts for the landed costs as separate from other shipping ones. Landed cost categories and create landed cost items. These are more complicated. I'm going to talk about them in a minute. But I do want to give you a word of caution. You saw the display order in that previous slide. Where's page up? Up here. Do you see that order? Shipping, duty charge, handling charge, second shipping charge. Depending how you create these cost categories, that's how it's going to show. And you cannot change them. It's based on your internal ID. It's another thing that really kind of bothered me. So if you put it in wrong and you want shipping first, you're going to need to start all over again. So make sure you set it up correctly the first time. Finally, the select inventory items. All it is a simple checkbox on each item. You can do direct list editing, mass update, which is nice. You can actually do a mass update. You don't have to do a CSV import, or you can do a simple CSV import. So those 2 fields in this previous slide, create landed cost categories and create landed cost items, That's what I wanted to talk about. You actually get there from, you can see on the bottom of this screen, it says setup accounting list cost category. Cory showed accounting list pricing levels. It's the same place, but you set up this other list, and it's called cost category. So this is sort of what I call these cues. This is what's going to show on the item receipt. When you receive an item and actually put a value in that, it actually creates an entry into that chart of accounts, because notice below the accounting list, I've actually exploded 2 of them. So you can actually see, like for cost, the shipping cost, that's the name of it. It's actually going to account 7,500 and that landed cost. So that's what I've set up as an expense in my chart of accounts. So you can actually have 2 different, you can have a handling charge or a duty charge that might go to the same account. It just depends how you want to look at them in your chart of accounts. Or you could have a separate expense account. From the bill item, so from the item receipt, it's essential that you use it, you have to, and that's actually what ends up creating an entry in the chart of accounts. On a bill, you can say, yes, I want to put the category in, or no, I don't. And there is an impact. And at the end of all this, I'll show you like why you want to make sure you do it or don't do it. From the other side, this is from that previous slide here, number 4, create landed cost items. You actually have to go in and create an other charge for purchase item. So you go into new items, other charge for purchase, and you create these landed costs. You can call it whatever you want. You don't have to call it landed costs. I just have for this demo, so it won't be confusing. You create these items, and this is where the key is. You have to make sure that whatever you put on the left side in the expense account has the same thing on the landed cost item, because that landed cost item is going to end up on your bill, and it's got to be the same, or one will never reverse the other. So that's really the key here. And you might want to have, even though it goes to the same expense account, you might want to have 2 landed cost items, because you still want to be able to look at the transactions under the other charge for purchase for landed cost duty and be able to see all those transactions when you look at the item. So hopefully, I know it's very confusing. If you have questions, that's why I put my email address on the first slide. So if you have questions about this, because we don't have time, because there might be a lot of questions on this, we don't have time to go into that now, but I can always be happy to talk to you about it. So applying landed costs, it works with advanced receiving, checked or unchecked. It works if you're going from a PO to an item receipt to a bill. It works if you're going from a PO to a bill. It works if, I'm not sure you can really do that. I guess you do, because that's probably deals with the advanced receiving. Or you can just go from a bill only. And landed costs can be billed together. So you might have situations where the landed costs and the shipping, so the shipping and the item, you get a vendor invoice, and the vendor, charges you for shipping. So it's all in one. Or you might get a bill from the vendor and it's third-party shipping. It might be going on to your UPS account. So then you would have to somehow connect that to your bill, and we'll show you how to do that. And sometimes it's mixed. So we have some vendors that they charge us a handling fee, but they charge our UPS account, and so it can handle that too. So we'll see how that's done. So the caution I have on this is that you must know at the item receipt, because you don't always know the shipping at the item receipt, whether you want to do the landed costs on the whole transaction, or you can actually do the landed cost by line item, which is pretty cool. We don't actually use line item by line item, but depending how your vendor breaks things out, you might. And maybe even if you're using inbound shipment. So there are 3 methods of, if you're doing it at the transaction level, there are 3 methods that you can use. You can do it based on weight, quantity, or value. If you're using it at the line level, you don't have a choice, because it's just based on the quantity, which makes sense. It's logical. Just putting this cautionary note in here, if you use standard costing items, read this, you might not want to use landed costs. You have a different method for doing it. And then I put this slide in here because it always comes up. What if you need to do landed cost in a closed period? What do you do? Well, what we do is we just don't close the period till we know we've got all those bills in. But sometimes UPS will come back to you a year later and go, oh, we have these charges for you. And then you need to think about what you want to do. Quite honestly, it's not easy to deal with because it'll all impact GL. So basically, we just write it off at that point. So here's kind of a landed cost snapshot example. This is showing you when you have a line level, you check this box, landed cost per line level, and suddenly underneath this landed cost column, these little things show up, like little bins show up, and you can actually put in multiple there. So by line, by each line level, line item, you can actually say which of all these, which charges are applicable. But it's kind of like you've got to figure it out. We don't use this, so. I'm putting this flow here because basically what happens in a lot of businesses, I don't know if it happens in yours, we do a PO, nothing impacts landed costs unless we're getting something from overseas, in which case we already know what the shipping will be. We receive the item, we don't know oftentimes what the shipping was at that point, not until we get the bill, or we haven't gotten the UPS bill. So we just say receive it, or it might be the receiving people. They don't know, they don't get the bill, so they just receive it and save it. And then when the bill arrives, that's when sort of the magic starts to happen. You go to your bill purchase orders because you haven't billed it yet. You add the landed cost items, and then you go in from the bill. There's a link to the item receipt. You can go right into the item receipt and add in the landed costs. Cautionary tale here. Experience. Don't do what I did. So what I would do is I would get the bill and I'd say, oh, there's a category. So you get the bill, you enter the landed cost item, and over on the right, there's a landed cost category. I go, well, this was shipping. So I'd enter that every time. And then I would go over to the bill and I'd go, oh, the vendor is $5. So I'd manually enter $5 into that shipping category on the item receipt. And then I ended up with all these things in this queue going, my God, how did that happen? How do I get them out of there? Well, it was too far gone. It was when landed cost first came out and I didn't know any better. So that basically what you have to know, if you put the landed cost category on the bill, and you'll see this, then you always use other transaction when you go to the item receipt. Otherwise, it's never going to take it off this queue. And it's going to be there forever. It's not going to impact GL or anything. It's just going to always appear on this list. So this is why I call it kind of a queue. And if you manually enter the cost of an item, and you don't use this other transaction, well, we just copy it off of the bill. Then do not put anything in that landed cost category. I'm not talking about the item. You still have the item, but this landed cost category on the right of that item, leave it empty, and then it won't appear on this queue. So don't do what I do. Learn from my mistakes. So we're going to go ahead and demo this at this point. You're going to have to come back another day for some of this. So I'm going to go ahead and first of all show you that there's a bill in here. There's already a FedEx bill. I'm going to bring this up. And then I'm going to go ahead and the simplest method is I'm going to create a bill that has both, instead of a PO to item receipt, I'm just going to create a bill that's basically doing both. So I'm going to go ahead and enter a bill. Cross components. And I'm going to go ahead and enter some line items. What? Oh, thank you. Yeah, if you already have this is one of the things that I have If you already have forms created, and then they were allowed, then NetSuite actually came out with the ability to have items first before expenses. You can't actually change the form. You have to go back to your standard form and customize all over. So. So if I received the bill only, this will impact inventory. But at this point, I'm going to just go ahead and say landed cost, shipping and handling, and I'm going to say that this is actually for the handling of it. I'm going to go over here, and I am going to select a landed. Notice that I didn't check this. If I had checked this, just see what happens. I go to the landed cost tab, and it's all grayed out. So I uncheck this, and suddenly I have this landed cost tab. By the way, if you do a PO to item receipt to bill, this tab won't show because it'll be irrelevant. It's only because I'm doing it all in one. And on this, I'm saying it's based on quantity, and my handling charge, I could put in $4.50. But since I put in those did I put in those categories on over here? No. So if I put in the categories over here, I can say this is for handling. And then I'm doing for shipping. Talk about shipping, that's a FedEx notification. So that's $100. Let's just make it something outrageous. And I'm going to say this is for shipping. And now I go over to the landed cost tab, and I could put in the manually, this is where I was saying, I could put in $4.50. But if I do that, because I put in the category on the item, it would be in this queue forever. Instead, what I want to do is say, and this only shows if you're only doing a bill that also has the item receipt. I say this transaction, and it'll pull it in automatically. And it would be the same thing here. I would say this transaction, and it would pull it in automatically. If I go here and I say this transaction, there's nothing there, so it doesn't pull in anything. So, but remember, we actually got a third-party billing for this. So I go back to the expense item because the bill is not the correct amount. It wasn't 151. That's because the shipping was actually done by a third party. So I want to remove this, and I go over to landed cost, and I say other transaction, and I know this was a FedEx bill, so I can put in FedEx, or I can put in the invoice number, and spam, sorry. And then if I do that, it pulls in the $100 from that third-party billing, and I hit save. And this is a workflow thing, because so many times people would forget to enter landed costs. It just says, did you enter landed costs? And it comes up. So that's not built into NetSuite. All right. Due to time, I'm not going to show the more complex one, which is a PO to item receipt to bill. But hopefully you get an idea of how this works and the value of it. So I'm going to move into the next section. which is assembly item explored. So if you have questions about landed costs, see me afterwards, contact me, because there's a lot more in depth I could be showing. But because of time, I'm not going to today. The assembly item explored. So Cory talked about assembly items. And the primary difference between an inventory item and an assembly item is the BOM. And those are the components that make up that item. So he mentioned that too. What I wanted to make sure you understood is that when I refer to legacy BOM, I'm talking about nobody uses advanced BOMs. So what you all use now, when you have an item and it shows components, that is what I call legacy BOM. The advanced BOM came out in 2018.1. So we're going to be talking a little bit about and showing you the difference. For those of you that have been wanting to explore it but didn't actually want to turn it on, that's good. You didn't turn it on because you definitely want to do it in a sandbox or a pre-release. Then we're going to talk about the difference between non-serialized and serialized assembly items. So non-serialized is just an assembly item. So when Cory was talking about assembly items, that's the non-serialized. And then we've got the serialized assembly item. Major differences are the costing method, because a non-serialized item, regular assembly item, is whatever you've set up. Average, LIFO, FIFO, where a serialized item has a very specific cost associated with it. It's whatever the cost is of that bill. You don't set up anything different. We have average costing set up in our system, but it just automatically knows that for the serialized item, it uses specific costing. Additionally, serialized items have an additional tab, and it's called Inventory Detail tab. And that Inventory Detail tab shows you what's in stock and what's been sold. Additionally, assembly items can be purchased, and I just threw this in here so you'd know. And you go, well, why in the world would you want to purchase it? Cory kind of went into that a little. You might actually purchase an item and want to unbuild it because you sell the components individually, or maybe you use components of it to go into other assemblies. So you might, you need to explode that out. So that's why you might want to do it. Some tips here is that if you don't want these assembly items to show up, because you could have assembly items that have sub-assemblies, et cetera, et cetera. If you don't want a sub-assembly or an assembly item to show in the drop-down list on a sales order when you're entering internally, then make sure to set the income account to empty. Also, note that you cannot convert or copy from a serialized inventory, serialized assembly to a non-serialized and vice versa. And this is really key, because if you had something and you set it up thinking it was going to be serialized and then it's not, or vice versa, you're basically hosed. You need to create that item all over again. So I'm going to actually that. So, but advanced BOMs gets around that. So that's one of the beautiful things about advanced BOMs. You don't have to decide at the time that you create your bill of materials if it's going to be serialized or non-serialized. And then big cautionary note on unbuilding assemblies. It doesn't work like you think it might work. You might have a product that you sell and it comes back. Our end products are assemblies, not kits, for a number of reasons. But if we were to sell something, 3 months ago and get it back, and we were to unbuild it in the same location, those average costs might change. So now suddenly things are going to change. The prices that it goes back, those components, those really kit items going back into inventory have different prices. That's why I think there's actually like an inventory variance field that you have to fill in when you do an unbuild. But also, if you get an instrument back and now you can't really sell it as new, it goes into an entirely different location, and you unbuild it there, if it has like zero value, all your components are going to have zero value. So it's just be aware, do your research if you're going to use the unbuild. So assembly items, the difference between regular assembly items and serial or lot number assembly items is the fact that if it's serialized, it can have serialized inventory, it can have serialized assemblies, and therefore you cannot make an assembly item that is not serialized and have those serialized items. So if you're going to be pulling in subcomponents or items that are serialized. It must be a serialized assembly that you create. So you can see over here on the left, you basically say, I have a new item. You have an assembly item, but you qualify it further and say it's a serialized assembly item. I wanted to, anybody use phantom items here? Okay, we use phantom items a lot. So I'm going to be talking about phantom, and I want you to understand what phantom and stock level items are. Love, love, love phantom. When they came out with that, it was like between that and work orders, I was a very happy camper. Changed our life entirely. Before that, we used to have to build sub-assemblies, and then we'd have to do an inventory adjustment, you know, take that sub-assembly, make it 0, and now increase a stock level of the same. It was a pain. It was really awful. But between now with the phantoms, basically, this is an example, and hopefully this makes it clear. It's not really there. A phantom item, a phantom assembly is not really there. You think it's there, but it's not. So here's an example. You have, you build bikes, and in the bikes, you have wheels, frame, saddle, handlebars, etc. And you stock these wheels. Maybe you build them ahead of time and they're sitting on the shelf, or maybe you get the wheels in from a vendor, and they're stocked. At some point, those wheels were actually, let's say you built those wheels yourself. They're actually made up of these components that you see highlighted in yellow. So when you go to build the final bike, you basically say, I need 2 wheels, because they're already stocked and on the shelf. And additionally, it would build, you know, pull in the frame, the saddle, etc. So that's a stock assembly. A phantom assembly basically says, and this came out in 2016.2, it basically says it's not really there. So those aren't sitting on the shelf. But since you might use those same wheels in multiple different bikes, do you want to have to list all those components in every assembly, in every bill of materials? No. So this basically allows you to build these sub-assemblies and say they aren't really there, but when I go to do my assembly build, explode it out like it's there. So you can reuse the components. I mean, the idea in software has been around for years. I remember programming in COBOL several years ago. I won't age myself, and we had these ability to reuse these modules, and we were like so excited. We didn't have to put the same code in detailed lines. This is the same impact. So does that make sense to people? You'll see when we actually do an example. So I wanted to talk about an inventory item versus an assembly item and what the difference is. These things highlighted in yellow are the differences. So the main thing is the components. In a regular item, you're not going to have a list of components. In an assembly item, you will. And this is where you would actually, do you see where it says item source stock? You could have something be phantom. And so you don't actually have to put all those components there. It will know at the time you do an assembly build that it will explode it out for you and pull them in. So you basically have these new fields, special work order, marked items, sub-items, phantom, mark this item as phantom. And basically a special work order means when you create a sales order, you can automatically create a work order that will turn into an assembly build. So we use that a bit, and I'll talk about that in a few minutes. This mark phantom, mark this item phantom, means anytime you use this component in another assembly, it's not really there, exploded out. So it allows you to reuse parts. So this picture here is showing you what we call the legacy BOM, or what's been around since the beginning of time. With advanced manufacturing, so you know, in this previous slide, you saw that all the components are listed on this components tab. When you do advanced bill of materials, you're going to have a different tab. There's not going to be anything under that components tab. Suddenly you have another tab called manufacturing. Under there, you're going to have a bill of materials. That's it, one line item, bill of materials. That bill of materials, so you might, this line, this part here, this airborne sensor sleeve, all I see, you see that manufacturing tab that's highlighted on that upper left? You drill into that, and then you see the bill of materials, but you don't really see anything, you just see all the revisions. And then you have to drill into revision, and finally you see the components. So you're going like, wow. I really just want to see them in one list. So then you want to keep with the legacy. But there's a lot of value in the advanced BOM. This is a pain, and I don't really like this aspect of it. If I were doing a new implementation, though, there are certain times where I want to do an advanced BOM. Would I change at this point? No, because when I see what it takes and all the cleanup I have to do at this point, it's just not worth it for us. So advanced BOMs, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Anybody remember the movie with Clint Eastwood? Good, the bad, and the ugly? Okay, somebody's got to remember it. At any rate, the good, it's the right way. I mean, if you're doing a new implementation, you want to have your bill of materials. You don't want to have to say, this is my product, and now this is my bill of materials. You want to build all your bill of materials and then assign them to various products. It's the right way. It's what should have been done. But, you know, NetSuite finally came around and provided this. And so if you're too far down the road the other way, it might not be worth it. It's great for new implementations. It's great for implementations where you're going to have assemblies that share multiple components because you have these bill of materials. It's going to be great for those where you build a bike in the East Coast and you build a bike, you build one in Boston and you build one in Colorado, and it takes a slightly different bill of materials, but you want to still sell the same product. Maybe it's just the part is going to be from a different vendor and it's going to be slightly different. So it allows for multiple BOMs to the same item, and you can choose. Like, you can basically say, if you're in the East Coast, you need to use this bill of materials versus the West Coast, and you set this up in your bill of materials, the West Coast would use this bill of materials. You can actually say, this bill of materials is only available for certain products, certain assemblies. You can define your yields, you can define your, your yield at the component level when you're doing a bill of materials. So for lost inventory that you know that you generally lose, you can have a way to look at all your BOMs in one place rather than having to go into all your items and look at all your BOMs. And I know you can do a bill of materials inquiry. Everything still works the same way. If you use advanced bill of materials, the assembly bills, the bill of materials inquiry, the work orders, everything works the same. It's just when you're at the item, the assembly item level, that you'll see something different. So lots of great things about it. The bad, it's a lot of layers if you're converting. It really can be very, very messy. It's not fully baked. NetSuite came out with this, what did I say, 2017.2, so 2 years ago. But you know how NetSuite is. It comes out with the product and it keeps improving. So when I say not fully baked, things have inconsistent results when you do an assembly build. In other words, sometimes things just show as undefined components if you don't enter fields in a certain order. Some converted BOMs have components that were obsolete. So if you use effective and obsolete dates in the legacy BOMs and you convert, sometimes those obsolete items still show up. So you need to really look carefully. You just need to clean them up, but you need to check them out. There's no global search for the BOMs. So every assembly item you have, when it converts it, turns it into a BOM. And that BOM might not really should be a BOM, a bill of materials. For instance, if you have hierarchical and you have parents, say you've got you've got a parent item called bikes, and then you've got different items underneath that, different types of bikes. When you do your conversion, you still have to create an item called bikes in NetSuite, and it's going to create a BOM for that, but there's nothing in there. And you're like, oh, well, you just go, okay, I'll just inactivate that. But if you inactivate that, guess what? You inactivate all the children. So I did that in my testing. I go, where did all my products go? Oh, yeah, I thought I was just inactivating that hierarchy, the parent item. The ugly, you have to either create all new BOMs or convert your legacy BOMs to advanced, and there's no going back. When you move to advanced BOMs, if you have effective and obsolete dates, you lose the history. You don't know what items changed within that BOMs. You lose that because they create versions. But because you're not using the engineering change management, which you would want to use in conjunction with advanced bill of materials, you really don't know what's changed. And maybe you don't care, but to me that was an ugly. And if you convert, some revisions include, like I said, the obsolete items. So this is what it looks like, an item in advanced BOM. I showed you a snapshot before of what it looks like under the components tab. Oh, this is showing actually list, supply chain, bill of materials. So you do need to have, I don't know if you get supply chain automatically, or maybe this does require the bundle too. I'm not quite sure about that. But at any rate, it shows the list of bill of materials. Like I said, you can't do a global search on a bill of material. So it takes every product that we've created and it changes and it adds a BOM. It says BOM after it and creates that. So the setup, here's the setup for it. I'm not going to go into this, but if you check it, you can't go back. So an advanced bill of materials components example, this is what it looks like. You still have the stock under item source, the far right column. You still see the stock, whether it's phantom or stock, the source, whether it's phantom or stock. And you've got these new fields, component yield. Also notice up above, it's always revision. So every bill of materials is a revision, and it tells you the effective start date of that revision. On the legacy BOM, this is what you might be used to seeing. You can have effective and obsolete dates for components. And that's what I was saying. It might actually bring in, when I was doing my testing, it actually brought in an obsolete date when I went to do my work order and assembly build. So I wasn't too pleased with that. But that's sort of the difference. Creating assembly builds, non-serialized, so I'm going back. Now, if you create an assembly build, whether you're using advanced BOMs or legacy BOMs, it all works the same way. If it's non-serialized, it just looks like this when you do an assembly build. The difference is that when you do a serialized, you get this new inventory detail where I've circled in red, and you get a pop-up window where you get to put in your serial numbers for this build. And it's really cool. You can either express entry. We build like 100 or sometimes 1,000 instrument, things at a time. And so you can use express entry, only it can't take 1,000. It cuts off at like 60. So in that case, you can auto-generate the number where you basically say, this is the prefix, I want these many digits for the next, and then you say what the starting number is, and it will fill in all the others. So it's really quite beautiful. All right, so let's take a look. And I think, because of time, I'm just going to go into work orders, and you'll see the assembly builds when we demo the work order. So let me go back in to this. So how do work orders compare to assembly builds? How many people here do assembly builds? Okay. How many people here do work orders? Okay. I'm not sure what you use assembly builds for, but we only use, first of all, a work order, which is really powerful, generates, when you're finished with the work order and you say build, it generates the assembly build. An assembly build on its own, to us, only has a certain value. And that value is, if we want to determine like what it costs to build that instrument today, we go in and do an assembly build of that item. That's great. We get that cost. But everything else we do with the work order, except if we do repairs, because repairs sometimes take assemblies. You might be an assembly item that you want to use in your repair, and it might have to be built. So then we might do an assembly. Otherwise, everything goes from a work order. So an assembly build is transactional, and the build occurs immediately, and the inventory is removed from your on hand. A work order, on the other hand, is non-transactional. It looks similar to an assembly build, but it's a holding area. And that's where you saw in the legacy BOM and the advanced that you could have stock, phantom, etc. If you do an assembly build, however you have that set up in your legacy BOM or in your BOM, that's going to be what it does. If you have an item that's phantom, it's going to explode it. If it's stock, it's not. You can't change anything. If you want to add an item, maybe you knew for this build you wanted to add, include a battery, you can include a battery in a work order. But in an assembly build, you can't add, you can't delete, you can't do any of that. But in a work order, you can. So if you know that for this run, you need to use a different resistor because the resistor wasn't available, but you don't actually want to change the BOM because it's just a one-time and it's very similar, you could just go into your work order and delete the one resistor and add the resistor you want to use temporarily. So it looks similar to an assembly build, but it's sort of a holding area. You can change the item source. You can change an item that maybe is usually stocked, or maybe it's usually phantom. It usually doesn't exist, but guess what? Somehow the manufacturing plant actually had extra time and they built some of these sub-assemblies. So now you want to say these are stock rather than phantom. And then it allows for auto generation of other work orders and POs from the work order. It allows for phased assemblies. So let's say you get an order in for 100 of one product, but you can only ship 50 now. From the work order, you can build just 50 of them and you can build 50 of them later, and it keeps it out there for you. One of the most powerful aspects of a work order, and what we love it for, is the fact that if you have a work order, you can have different statuses. You can say this is a planned work order or a released work order. If it's a released work order, it commits the inventory if you've set up to allow commit inventory. It commits the inventory, which means that it'll show in that item that you have committed what's available and you have back ordered X amount. So we actually have a saved search that's really powerful that will show us our shortage based upon that. So we love being able to have this. And then, if we do it also for determining, we're going to do a build of 1,000 of these board levels that go into our instruments, we can actually set that on as released for testing, to get that analysis, and then we can change it back to planned. Because when it's planned, it doesn't commit the inventory. So you can create work orders from 3 locations. You can do it from a sales order, because for us, we don't use kits, as I mentioned earlier. We use assemblies. So when we sell items, we build those assemblies at the time of we build those assemblies using the work orders for each item that we sell. You can also manually enter an individual work order. It's good for assemblies and sub-assemblies components that are stocked. And then you can also mass create work orders. And that's going to use your reorder points. And that's why I said we like to set our reorder points manually rather than have the system auto-calculate. But if you use the auto-calculator, it would work just the same. Basically, it would say, oh, you need to build, this assembly based upon your reorder point and your preferred stock level. So a work order from a sales order, it's as simple as on the sales order, there's a field called Create Work Order. And if you actually have checked that box that when you sell this item here, when you sell a TruePoint 2100, that you want the work order automatically created, that would automatically be generated. Or you can just say, after you save it, you can say create the work order. When you enter the sales order, you can just check a box and it'll create the work order. If you manually create the work order, this is what a work order looks like. And you can see that you have the item source and that you can change. And you can see down below that you can actually enter line items and you just as easily delete. Or you mass create work orders. So I just show sort of how you get to that point. And then you can check off all the ones that you want to mass create the work orders. You can also mass create assembly builds. You can't mass create assembly builds if they're serialized, because you actually have to enter in the serial numbers. But if they're not, you can mass create assembly builds. You can mass create work orders that will generate those assembly builds. So if you manually create a work order, this is where you have the planned, released. These are the different statuses that I was talking about, how you could change it from release to planned and planned to release. And also You can change the item source to be a stock, to be a phantom. From a work order, you can say, when you save this work order, I want to have it create another work order. I want to have it create a purchase order, things like that. So there's a lot of power in this work order. The planned versus released is important because I already mentioned that one commits and one doesn't, and that's the beauty. And you can go back and forth. You can change it. Something's released, you can make it planned, released. In fact, there's a page called Mark Work Orders Released, where you can just check off boxes and say, I want to release all these planned work orders. And it's as simple as that. Or you could go into the individual work order and change it. However, if it's released, there's no nice little checkbox things to change it back to plan. So what I've provided for you here is an easy way to do it. I'm not going into it now, but it's creating a saved search and a simple workflow. And I've put in all the information you need so that you can create the saved search where you can check boxes and change the status from released back to plan. So as far as building work orders, you get a build work order screen, and you can build one automatically or manually. Like I said, if it's serialized, you must do it individually. So you can just basically say from this location, build all of these work orders, and it's going to go ahead and generate assembly builds. So let's go ahead and show that. So if I were to create a work order, sales order, and I'm going to put in a product here. And I'm going to say we want to build, 20 of these. Notice this checkbox over here on the right. I can check create work order at this time. Check that box, or like I said, you can have it defaulted based upon the item. I'm going to say OK. Save. Oh, sorry. I need to go into shipping and just put in 0 here. And then from here, where is it? I did have that checked, didn't I? Oh, thank you. Need to approve it. So I'm not sure it will automatically create it at this point since I didn't approve it. Oh, it did. See, there's the work order that was created. So created work order 1076. I go into that and I see all the components here. You can see there's several items here. I'm going to they're kind of wrapped there. But at this point in the work order, I could actually edit it. And I'm using advanced bombs here, by the way. I'm not sure if I can change this at this point or if it's going to be one of those buggy things. Looks like I can. So notice how it exploded all these levels. And most of these things were just phantom, like this PSN Rev B uppercase assembly. This was a phantom item, but it pulled in all the components of it. Same for this. And then even in this subassembly, it had another subassembly that was phantom. But maybe this subassembly, I know now that we actually have some on the shelf. So I could change this to stock. And then you'll see that those things underneath it disappear. So now it's considered a stock item right here, where before it exploded even further. And at this point, if I know that I want to have batteries, you can add a part. This is something you need to be careful of if you change it. If I just put one, what's going to happen? I'm going to end up with a build that takes one battery and divides it by 20. So you need to make sure you use the same amount of components there. And just as easily, I could have removed a component here. And save it. And then this is where I was saying you could create your build right from here. And by doing that, it actually creates the assembly build. So you could have done an assembly build by itself. And if I'd done an assembly build, it would have looked just like this, except I wouldn't have had the option to change something from phantom to stock or stock to phantom, and it wouldn't have had this additional item. So if I'd just done an assembly build from scratch. And then I wanted to just show here, because this is a serialized item, there's another field on here, there should be anyway, that going to build 20, somewhere on here. Anybody see it? It should be inventory detail. Anybody see inventory detail on there? Oh, there it is, over to the right, sorry. So if I go into inventory detail, because this is serialized, I go into here and I could cut and paste from a spreadsheet if I knew those numbers, you know, because I said there's 20, or I can auto-generate these numbers. And so I can say the prefix is, this is just 05, you know, -1000, and that's the prefix, and then the minimum digits is 4, and I'm going to say start with the number 10, and then it's going to go ahead and explode them out for me. See that? Isn't that beautiful? If you have to do 1,000 of these, it's just really, really nice. So I want to say OK, and then all you do is save, and that's it. That's how simple it is. But with that build, I could have said instead of 20, I'm only building 10, and that work order would have stayed out there. So are there any questions that you have? Was this helpful at all? Yes?
I just have one.
Sure.
When you had a released work order and then you changed it back to a planned work order, did it uncommit that inventory?
Yes. The question was, if you change from released to planned, does it uncommit the inventory? The answer is yes. And just to show you, I'm not, you know, going to go home real quick. Well, I'm going to show you here. I actually have this back order report, and this is using, oh, that's weird. Oh. Oh, right. So at any rate, basically what it would do is it would bring up the shortage based on those committed items with a safe search that I created. Or you could go to the work order page, I mean the order items page, and it would know that those are committed, and you could also order from there. Are there any other questions? Yes? Into one purchase order.
Yeah, we have our, we own our components, but they're housed in our manufacturer. So it's not a standard work order.
So from a purchase order, you have work orders?
It's fine. I'll talk to you after.
Okay. Yeah, please do, because I am curious about that. Are there any other questions? Okay, well, the slide deck had a lot more information. Oh, wait a second. You guys need the CPE credit, don't you? For those that want CPE credit, you need to know the new code. Did you give them the one code? Oh, okay, cool. I must have I obviously wasn't listening. I was probably at the breakfast table. So this is your second CPE keyword, everybody. For those of you that are attending locally, for those of you remote, we don't offer CPE credits. So you're going to have to come in person. Maybe someday we will. And then finally, these are just something that's been added that you can see in the slide deck. Very useful pages and why they're useful. These are NetSuite pages, and these are NetSuite reports and why they're useful. So that's it. If you have any questions or anything you want clarity on, please see me afterwards or email me.